feature presentation.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the I don't even know what draft of the Untitled
I think it's 104.
Movie. 104 of the Untitled Movie Podcast. I am one of your hosts, Matt Rohrbeck, alongside he's allergic to tomatoes, but he is tomato meter approved, Eric Marchin.
Matt, you're almost there. You're
You
getting
can tell
ready to
that
move.
I'm moving in a week and a half as we're recording this, and depending on when you're listening to it. So I apologize if things are a little scatterbrained, but hence I didn't prep anything
As to
for
normal.
the show. Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's a little bit normal.
We always
usually
fly by the seat of our pants for this episode. That's what makes it, 66 views on YouTube.
That's funny. Yeah. You know what? When we're noticing on YouTube, popular short movie reviews, not so popular. I'm sure I know our audio numbers are higher than YouTube, especially for this show. But people don't want to necessarily watch our dumb faces on YouTube for like 2.5 hours.
Which we totally get. We're like when we're doing this, we're doing it just for the sake of like, okay, there's an option, if you want
to put it on your TV screen, sure.
Yeah.
Or your iPhone or whatever, but you're probably not going to hold your phone.
Or if
for
you're
that
Matt's
long,
mom,
which is like,
I
go back and forth. Cause like I talk about, podcasts that I listen to are kind of funny specifically, which I will be on Screencast again this week on Wednesday to cover the last 3 episodes of Star Wars Visions. So keep an eye out for that on October 13th. But I watched a lot of my podcasts on YouTube, which is, so I thought that's a good option for people. But yeah, for like a 2+ hour podcast, you can tell, that's probably better as an audio thing, but the option's there if you want to watch it. And we do appreciate those 50 to 75 people that click on it. And
we sure do.
I always talk about this because, starting our YouTube channel and, audio for podcasts is always going to be more popular, and maybe we'll, I just wanted another option. And I think our movie reviews really do make sense on YouTube. Obviously they're still podcasts first and foremost. So, we're thinking about other ideas that are YouTube specific and things like that we'll do, that's not necessarily just a podcast format. But
we've been talking about sort of condensing a whole 2 hours into a animated GIF,
into a TikTok.
Yeah.
And here's the 2.5 minute version. Even though that's even too long for TikTok, I think you can upload 3 minutes now. Anyways, but I always said, anyone who's watching or listening to this, if you want to start a podcast, just do it, because Eric and I do this because we love it. And
well, it's because we just do it in general. So it's like, why not share our madness with the rest of the world?
If I told you 60 people would come into my living room and listen to us talk for 2.5 hours about movies, I'd be fucking thrilled with that. So when you say, 2,000 people watched a video of a Bond review you did, or in audio format, more than that, we're thrilled with even if 3 people listen to us. So we joke about it, but it is kind of funny to just, you're like, get the options there. But Eric, happy belated birthday.
Yes, I am near one step closer to the grave.
You're not that. You're 33, right?
Yes.
I don't even know how you get to a point. Do you get to a point where you forget how old you are, or no?
A little bit. I think when you get into like, each new decade of life, like when you like in your early 30s, and I was thinking earlier this month, I was like, wait, am I 32 or 33?
Yeah, that's what I struggle with now. I'm like,
but that's kind of like with the big milestones. Like I think what I appreciate the most now, when you're a kid, you're excited about the presents and the parties and things like that. And then when you get older, I think what you appreciate the most is, getting a call or a message from a friend or a family member that, is still willing to acknowledge that you're alive. And I think that that's the most kind of gratifying thing. And then, like, when you get people on social media, whether it be Facebook or Twitter or things like that, saying happy birthday, that's just kind of the cherry on top, and this just very nice. And I really appreciated anybody that kind of, took a second to post a happy birthday or something like that. It's very, very nice of anyone to do that. And so thank you. And it's just, I think, between like, when you're in your 20s and into your 30s, and you're in the stages of like 21 to or 31 to 34, 35, 36, and 21 to 28 or something like that, like, you just, it doesn't matter as much. It's
Yeah.
at that point you're waiting for like the next 10, where it's like, I'm sure when I get to 40 or 39, I'll be like, oh God, like, what have I done with my life? And having that quote unquote midlife crisis. But with
Yeah.
33, it was just kind of like, oh, okay.
Yeah, I get with you when it's, or I get what you're saying. Of those mid-tier birthdays that aren't a milestone, that you kind of, that's where I get confused. I'm like, okay, I was born in '89. Am I turning 33, 32? I'm like, oh, okay, it's 32. And then I know that I'm 1 year younger than you, so I can just always just use that as a, you'll die 1 year before me, so I
Not unless
will.
I kill you first.
So, fair, fair. But you came over on your birthday. We hung out, which has now been, at least an annual tradition for the last 2 years. But here and there we would do this before too. But because your
We'd always
birthday,
grab lunch or
yeah,
something. So
something.
yeah.
But the last 2 years, because I've been in the Durham region, and we'll try to continue this even when I'm back in Toronto. But it's fun because your birthday's in October, which is spooky season. So the
It's the
last
month of the
two
beast.
the last 2 years you've come over and you're like, hey, I'm going to show you some movies that you probably should have watched by now. But I think you'd like them, whether they're horror comedies, or last year we watched The Fly and
Fright Night and
Fright Night. And
Night of
those
the
were the two last
Creeps.
year. Night of the Creeps. We watched 3 last year,
Oh
right?
yeah.
This year we started a bit late, only watched
But also,
2.
again, you've been busy for the last couple of weeks, and you've been pretty exhausted, and also, I mean, you were very nice to buy dinner at, take out at
Last
Sushi
year Pizza
Mountain.
Hut,
Yeah.
this time
No, Boston
sushi.
Pizza was
Oh
last
yeah,
year.
Boston Pizza,
Yeah, and
sorry.
then this year was sushi, and we had a really nice dinner with Nevis as well, and it was, yeah, it was the highlight of my week. And thank you very
I'm
much for doing
glad.
that.
It was fun. We watched Arachnophobia, as well as Return of the Living Dead.
Which
Two
I
movies
am
I hadn't.
so surprised you have never seen Arachnophobia,
Yeah,
just because of how much of a proto Jurassic Park it is.
absolutely. And you kept saying that, and from the minute the movie starts, I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, I totally understand what you're saying. And obviously, directed by Frank Marshall, who obviously married to Kathleen Kennedy. They
Who's a
are
producer
producing,
on the film.
yeah, producing partners together. They produced a lot of Spielberg stuff, and they've
And
continued
Spielberg's
to
an executive producer
yeah.
on this as well.
Yeah, and they've continued to produce a lot of stuff together throughout, time. And you can really see that this predates Jurassic Park, but you can kind of, see Frank Marshall's, hand in Jurassic Park, I think, after directing this movie. And obviously very different. This about killer spiders, where but there is even a reference to man-eating dinosaurs in this, is, and just a real blast. Like, you can just tell from the cinematography to the setup to the characters, even, like, there is a lot of Jurassic Park in this movie. And yeah, if you don't like spiders, not a great movie to watch, but terrifying because of that as well, where I feel like you can watch numerous supernatural horror movies and things like that, and you're like, this shit's never gonna happen to me, so it's not like that scary. But
I'm
a
not going to
bunch
get
of
possessed by Bagul.
yeah, but but spiders coming to kill you, something that could happen.
Especially in Australia.
Yeah, thank God we don't live in Australia, because everything can kill you there. But
It's
had a
it's
blast with
also
that movie.
it's
And
also held up really well,
yeah,
considering
it
that it
does
is an
actually.
early
Yeah,
90s movie, and they're using, for the most part, real spiders with some puppet effects, but even the puppet effects
are great
are
for
are
like
st-
close-ups. They use
oh
puppets
man,
and stuff
those
like that.
close-ups of the eyes kill
Yeah,
me every time.
yeah,
It's just, and I think that, like, what I miss the most about that kind of movie is not only just how the payoffs are so rewarding, in sort of the script and how it's able to set things up so almost seamlessly, but I just love the small town under
Yes.
siege by
It's the best.
something, and
Yeah.
in this case being, you know, spiders that are terrifying. And there are moments in it where like you see the pulsating egg sac where you're just like,
It's just
it's so
gross.
disgusting. And it's like,
Yeah.
that is, I mean, I know the special effects makeup artist on The Fly worked on this as well, Chris Wallach, and yeah, it's just one of those movies where it's like, it's very much a horror comedy, but it's also merciless in terms of like, it does feel like there is real sort of danger to everybody that's in the vicinity of this small town of Kamina, and sort of like, you know, nobody
That
is
doctor
safe.
too, such an asshole.
Oh, it's amazing.
Like,
That character, like, I even love that as well, in terms of like how it kind of reflects contemporary society of like, you know, you have a whole generation of baby boomers and the generation before millennials. Is it the
Gen Z, no,
Gen
Gen
X,
X,
Gen Xers,
Gen X, I
where
think.
like
Yeah.
you could sort of equate it to this sort of small town doctor who says he's going to retire, is at the stage of when he should be retiring,
Poor Jeff
decides
Daniels uproots his family, goes to
from
this small
San
town.
Francisco to, yeah, this
Like,
small Midwestern town.
sure,
And
Jeff
then,
Daniels a little bit of a prick too at the beginning, but
yeah, but I
kind of
mean,
the.
come on. I mean, I think given the circumstances, he's,
I would be pissed too. I'd be
yeah.
like, bro, I literally moved my whole family here, man. Like, you can't just now go, you know what? I changed my mind. I'm like, you couldn't have called, like, before I moved here. Like, you could have given me, did you just decide today on my way to your office to get all your clients that, like, you know what? Fuck this guy. Like, I don't care. I will put him and his family through the shit and he won't make any money. They just bought a house here. Like, what a piece of garbage this guy is. Like, I was so mad at this man. Like, I was like, that's just unprofessional. And I'm like, no wonder. I mean, you got what you deserved, bro. You got what you deserved.
That's a
So,
pretty good review. But again,
um,
great payoff. I think the cellar sequence is incredible. I really
yeah,
like Jeff
the
Daniels in the
writing is
movie
really good. We talked
quite a bit.
about, like, yeah, Jeff Daniels is great, but
Pre Dumb
like,
and Dumber Jeff Daniels.
yeah, and John Goodman is fantastic.
And John Goodman, I mean, we're going to be talking a lot about Scream because you watched the first two
I did,
movies, and we'll
yeah.
be talking about the new trailer. But it's also funny to think that, like, I don't think Arachnophobia influenced it, but like, John Goodman has a theme that plays every time that he's
It's
introduced.
great.
That's very similar to Dewey's theme in
Which
Scream.
I didn't realize is from Broken Arrow.
Yeah,
Did you?
yeah.
I like, because I'm in
The John
like,
Woo movie. Yeah.
yeah. I was listening. Shout out again to Kind of Funny and Nick Scarpino, and Nick's gonna try to come back on the show very, very soon. I gotta land a time with him. But they were doing Scream in review, so I was listening, and they're just like, his theme is just the theme from Broken Arrow. It's just like, it worked, and they're like, let's keep it in this movie, and now it became Dewey's theme. Anyways, going back to this, yeah, John Goodman's fantastic. I was pleasantly surprised with just the structure and the writing of the movie. Like, again, it's just like a horror adventure comedy kind of thing, but like, I thought it was really clever in its setups and its payoffs throughout the whole movie. Like, it never felt like that kind of thing where I roll my eyes, where it's like, the slow dolly zoom on the, like, the knife or the thing that's going to come back in the third act, the Chekhov's gun kind of thing in the third act. And like, I just think
Chekhov's
this,
bad wood.
yes, yes, exactly. So this movie, I think, does a really great job with that stuff, where, everything that's referenced does come back at the end, but it all feels kind of very earned in like a fun, ridiculous payoff of this, like, fight with this spider and this mother spider and this egg sac, and like,
It gets very gooey and creamy at
yeah,
the end.
yeah, God, it does. And I just think it was really like, it's a fun ass movie. And like, I'm so glad that you showed it to me, because it's just something I missed. Like, even the poster I'm looking at right now in Letterboxd, it's awesome with the, the cotton candy sky and this, Charlotte's Web kind of spider on the moon kind of thing. And I really, really enjoyed it, man. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. And if you haven't seen it and you like Jurassic Park or those Frank Marshall, Kathleen Kennedy produced kind of,
or Amblin films, like,
Amblin,
even though it's not an Amblin movie, because Amblin at that point, I think,
was in a weird, like,
was on its way out, basically,
yeah.
but it does kind of fit that kind of group of like Poltergeist and movies like that, or a lot of the stuff that Joe Dante was making in the 1980s, even Gremlins. Like it's like it kind of fits that milieu kind of perfectly, and it's just unfortunate that we don't really get those movies much anymore. And yeah, I loved also that it's just shot on film. It looks really nice still. Peter Jason, who's a John Carpenter regular, plays the high school coach with short shorts, and it's just like those
the
little
shortest shorts
touches.
is the best. It's just like, but like the short shorts with like the jacket and the sweater on is such a
which
great
makes him
look.
look weirdly
Like I'm kind of
more
wearing
naked.
like you know, short shorts are coming back. I don't know if you can see this, but like my shorts aren't as short as his because his are like literally right under his sack. Speaking of sacks, but and then he's got the sweater, which is a look that I like, which I've adopted at home during quarantine for sure. Is, you know, the sweatshirt with the shorts, but his are just the shortest shorts. It's the best.
Yeah, and shout out to Frances Bay, who plays the doctor's wife, who's best known as the grandmother in Happy Gilmore, and also was in Blue Velvet and Twin Peaks. She's awesome, and
she's
it's
great.
always nice to see her pop up.
And Jimmy
stuff.
Buffett.
Oh yeah, every movie should end with a Jimmy Buffett song that's written specifically for a film. Between Beach Bum and Arachnophobia,
it's the best.
It's so literal too, which is funny.
Like I'm like, what? It's like such a weird song for the credits of the movie, because it's just like, who should we get to do the, you know, the closing credit song about the spider? Jimmy Buffett?
See,
like,
I think that's one thing that the new Bond movie would have benefited from if Jimmy Buffett did this.
Yeah. Sorry, Billie Eilish. We had, you know, when like Radiohead was supposed to do the Spectre song and they got replaced. It's like, sorry, Billy, we're gonna replace you with Jimmy Buffett.
I'll take my margarita shaken not stirred.
Yeah, it's the best. So then moving on, we watched Return of the Living Dead, which
Dan O'Bannon's film.
Yeah. So the setup here, Eric, sort of being kind of a meta sequel to Night of the Living Dead. Is that what
yes? So
saying?
John Russo, who was the co-writer on Night of the Living Dead, had a falling out with George Romero, and there was this whole legal battle with sort of the rights to the film because they didn't really trademark it properly. Like it's known that Night of the Living Dead is in the public domain when it really shouldn't be, and that's why they lost a lot of money, but also they fought over sequel rights. And so part of it was John Russo got part of the name, and then Romero got the other part, and so Romero went on to direct Dawn and Day of the Dead, which are more thematic follow-ups or sequels, where Return of the Living Dead is almost kind of like a sort of mockumentary sort of meta sequel to Night of the Living Dead. A lot of people, you know, love the opening sequence in Fargo where it suggests that it's based on a true story.
Right away.
And Return of the Living Dead predates Fargo for doing that.
But it's a kind of a tongue-in-cheek, like everything in this is absolutely true. We did not change the names of anyone.
Well, even them talking about the character, like Night of the Living Dead as a documentary and not like, or like based on like a true story. And sort of the names were changed and some of the stuff were changed because Romero was too close to the material. And Dan O'Bannon, who directed the film, also is kind of best known as being the writer on Alien. He wrote the first Alien.
Oh, cool.
And so with this, it's a very goofy, over-the-top 1980s horror comedy that is like ultra violent, but in that kind of comic booky kind of way. Like it's got tons of blood spurting. It's also the first zombie film to introduce the concept of zombies eating brains. Before that, zombies were flesh eaters. It wasn't specifically for brains, and since then that's kind of like one of the big things to carry on with that series. And then also on top of that, you have as my dogs are barking because they probably hear a zombie, you have the two sort of main actors that kind of set this up, these two kind of bumbling sort of industrial workers that are more worried about. The
opening sequence with them is really good.
Oh, it's great. James Caan and Tom Matthews. And for horror fans, again, James Caan played Craig T. Nelson's boss in the first Poltergeist movie, and Tom Matthews played Tommy Jarvis in Friday the 13th Part 6. There's also another Friday the 13th sort of reunion there as well with Miguel A. Nunez Jr., who plays one of the punkers who's friends with Tom Matthews' character, who's in Friday the 13th Part 5, the one where it's not Jason, that it's just actually a paramedic. He's the one that gets killed in the outhouse. And then you also have the guy who's kind of like the unstable punk rocker Suicide, who's also in Friday the 13th Part 5, who plays a very similar character who kills a larger sort of foster kid and is arrested early on. So there's a lot of weird sort of horror synergy going on with this. But I think the best parts of this movie, I really love this film. It's so goofy, it's so over the top, but I think when it comes to the zombie genre, I'm usually bored out of my mind because zombies are never the interesting thing about those films. It's about the minutia of setting up sort of like, you know, survival tactics and where to sort of hide and what's the best,
or the human characters or anything, or the setting. A
zombie movie is only as good as the human characters and the writing in terms of how to sort of survive an apocalypse like this. But the special effects are really fun. There's the whole backstory about Lena Quigley's character.
The military aspect of it is kind of cool.
That's I think maybe the funniest stuff in terms of the satire, where you have this one army general who's always like on duty waiting to, you know, hear a call from this sort of makeshift telephone device he has in his home, and like, you know, he comes home from work and his wife asks him how it was and he's like, oh, shit as usual. And, you know, she asks like, what's for dinner, and it's like lamb chops. Like, oh, I had pork chops for
no, he said I had lamb chops for lunch. Like, which is just ridiculous. And like, we're gonna talk about Scream in a little bit too when we talk about the trailer, but like, this did remind me of that kind of, you know, that horror satire that is still very much a horror movie, or in the sense of genre, like a genre zombie movie, but is treading that kind of fine line between satire and being a straight up, you know, what it's making fun of as well. And I think that's kind of why I really enjoyed it, because it can be goofy and over the top and poking fun at it, but then it is also just kind of a fun zombie movie as well. And like, I liked that the zombies could actually communicate a little bit, like, which is something that you don't, you know, often, that they're just these mindless kind of things that just want brains, where they're having like saying full sentences, and like, you know, there might not be of their right mind, but
or
you know,
no mind.
Yeah, but I like that they weren't just brains. It was just like they could actually say things and things like that. I had fun with it. I don't know if I loved it because I just maybe don't have that nostalgia for it or something like that. So I totally understand that. And zombies, again, never really been my thing. I did have I had a blast watching it with you. And I still think it was pretty good. But
to your point, it is a deconstruction of the genre, and I think it is one of the more earlier examples, at least in North American.
Going back to my Scream reference,
filmmaking, because you look at something like this and Friday the 13th Part 6, where there is this kind of meta humor, sort of winking at the camera and sort of like looking at how silly these movies can be, whether it be the zombie genre or the slasher genre. And then, you know, Wes Craven's New Nightmare is kind of considered the proto version before Scream,
and then you get years before Scream,
and then you get Scream, and then the most recent iteration of that would be The Cabin in the Woods, where that is kind of looking at horror as a whole and sort of saying, okay, like, these are the mechanics of like what you would expect in this kind of movie, and it's satirizing it, but at the same time it's able to still play with it in a way that isn't just simply having its cake and eating it too. It's actually both a horror movie, but it's also a lot of fun. So it's just
one of my favorite genres of horror.
Yes.
Like, it's like, I love the deconstruction of a genre while still being very much a part of that genre. Like, I think that is like, I mean, the Jump Street movies, I think, do that really well in a different way for action movies and cop movies and stuff like that. Like, that stuff, it can be very funny, but then is still a great version of the movie that they're poking fun at. And
it doesn't have to be a scary movie.
Yeah, exactly. Where like, scary movies, I do really want to rewatch those with you and just talk about them because that could be fun. But
I'm itching to
um,
rewatch the first
yeah,
couple at least. Maybe not
yeah, like
the
4, 5, and
Zucker
6,
sequels
but
or
like,
things
yeah,
like that, the ones with Simon Rex, but um yeah, I'm it's been a while since I've seen
maybe
the
before
first
Red
couple.
Rocket, we're gonna have to watch them all just to kind of familiarize ourselves again. But yeah, had a absolute blast watching those with you for your birthday. So that was a good time. Um, cool. Another new thing, we're putting time codes in our videos and podcasts, everyone. So if you hear me click clacking away as we change topics, that's me just putting in a time code. Eric, what else have we could go into Scream a bit later.
Well, we could talk
um
about it now because I mean, I watched
sure.
the first 3 Scream movies last Halloween or last October, and the trailer for Scream 5 was released today, so I almost feel like we could just do like a whole kind of like Scream segment.
Yeah, let's do it
uh
because if we're talking about what we've been watching, yeah, I Nevis and I went to Ajax Cineplex
the
on
loneliest
Sunday night.
Cineplex in all of
Dude,
Durham.
it's very quaint, I will say that.
There's a
Yeah,
charm to it, yeah.
there is, and it reminds me of the Bowmanville Theater or like Cineplex when it was back at the Oshawa Center, like a mall Cineplex and stuff like that. It kind of has that. It's dingy, but they've sort of updated it, but not
But it's still
really.
almost like
Like
time's forgotten it in a
it's
way.
gotten, it doesn't even have stadium seating. It has that old, like, if you've been to the Varsity Cinema in Toronto and Theater 8, that like kind of, it's not stadium seating, it's just on a ramp and like the seats are just kind of that. And even buying my tickets, I didn't realize that. And then I got there, I'm like, oh, I picked way too close to the screen because I usually sit like, a couple rows back in a stadium seating, like row, C or D or something. Pick that here and I'm like, we're a bit too close. Luckily, we were the only ones there, so it was awesome. Like we went. Scream is playing the 25th anniversary version of the movie is playing in cinemas for the next week. So I think you still have until like this weekend to catch it at some. It's not every cinema, but Cineplex, the odd one, Young and Dundas is playing it. Ajax is playing it. A couple other ones in our area as well. Sorry,
And
you want to jump in? Yeah.
yeah, I was just going to quickly mention, if you aren't feeling up to going to the theater yet,
4K too.
the 4K physical media release will be available this month as well. So
Yeah, in a week, I think, or this week,
yeah,
next week, this week,
sometime in
soon.
October.
Yeah, yeah. I think it might be next week, but yeah, the Scream 4K 25th anniversary as well is also coming out, which I'm sure this was that version, I think, although projected in 2K but on a big screen. But I think it was this new restored edition of it. Very grainy, still looked really, really good. Wish the screen was masked. That was a bummer
Yeah.
because like, especially on an older movie like that, like it would have just been nice to kind of have that film feel to it. And I feel like that kind
You
of,
need to see Henry
um,
Winkler in
yeah,
his full form in a masked auditorium.
yeah. So unfortunately was not masked, but ghost faced was. But I think it holds up. I really love the Scream movies, and weirdly they were the masked slasher movie of our era, which is weird because it's really, like we just said, deconstructing those slasher movies of previous eras, and that was kind of a dormant genre until kind of Scream came back and sort of started bringing back the slasher movie.
Well, even
Kind of.
horror in general, because
Um,
at that point in the early 90s, you got a little bit of it with both Candyman and The Silence of the
yeah,
Lambs, and even maybe Misery with Stephen King, that adaptation. But then, as the 90s progressed, I think like horror was so prominent in the mainstream and debated quite a bit, with both A Nightmare on Elm Street and Friday the 13th throughout the 1980s, and slasher films in general, that it was almost like a burnout by the time you got into
yeah,
the early 90s. And so horror in general at that point, was kind of on on the outs a little bit, in unless you were doing something that was either prestigious or was more of a one-off, because again, Candyman was because of the success of Hellraiser, and so Clive Barker was able to get that made, and then with Silence of the Lambs, that was something that was kind of considered more prestigious, and then
Yeah, more of a thriller, I guess, right? Even though
yeah,
it's very much a horror movie, but
yeah.
so Scream was one of those movies like I watched as, a very young kid, probably my first introduction to like horror and to the slasher movie. Silence of the Lambs, another one. I remember seeing that box art at Rogers Video and Blockbuster and being terrified with the moth uh cover and stuff like
Yeah, the
that.
Death
But
Moth, yeah.
yeah, but Ghostface and the Scream movies are just very nostalgic to me because it was my introduction to the slasher movie. And my sister Sarah was absolutely terrified of Ghostface. And did I
It
go with
is
Ghostface?
a compelling
Yeah,
villain. Like that's another thing that I think is taken for granted nowadays, is that it is really hard to create an iconic looking
masked
villain
serial
or
killer
monster,
villain. Yeah,
movie
yeah,
monster. Like design wise, it's like we've gone through so many of them, whether it be the xenomorph and alien, or even just something as simplistic as a guy wearing a hockey mask that's not even introduced until the third movie in the franchise, or Freddy and with the the sweater, the
Mike
red and green.
Myers, obviously.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Mike Myers being a very prominent figure. It's really hard to kind of create an iconic image like that, and
Like, have we
go
had one, you think, since Ghostface that's
well,
like
other than
really
Bagul.
no, but like truly like you would put like I would put Ghostface with those other people you
Yeah,
mentioned, right?
and
Like
Ghostface
on
was also based on a real um
costume, right?
costume. Like it wasn't
Yeah.
something that was just created for the film. Like it was
Yeah.
like
Well, now
father
that
father time or something. That was the
yeah,
original
it was, and
costume.
I think they had to get the rights to it
Yeah,
or something afterwards because they were like, "Oh shit!" like,
but now that is a good question.
what would be like? You have your, Jigsaw, but he's not a masked serial killer because you got like
No, but I
Billy the
would say that
Puppet
the
from that.
doll is
Like,
probably somewhat
yeah,
like iconic in terms of, at least in horror fan mythology. Like you see, like a parody version, or you just see,
Billy the
sexy
Puppet.
Billy.
Yeah, yeah,
You
yeah,
know what it's referencing. I
yeah.
would say probably, even though I don't like the Saw movies, you can't deny that
I'm
image
thinking
is
of
somewhat
serial
iconic.
killers that you
Well,
put
even
in that same,
monsters,
yeah,
even movie
monsters. Yeah,
monsters. Like that was the one thing that I think we've talked about before on the show, or even on movie night, where like Super 8, I think one of the things that kind of ruins that movie is that the monster design is just not memorable in any
yeah.
way. And like you look at like even the Cloverfield monster, like it's kind of interesting looking, but it just kind of feels very similar to any
Looks like
sort
a
of
bat, yeah, or something like that.
Godzilla-esque
Yeah.
sort of villain of the week in one of those movies.
Yeah, I agree. So yeah, shout out to Ghostface. But yeah, I think Scream
He's the
still
ghost with the most face.
yeah. And I like, each movie it being a different killer, I think keeps him kind of scary because
Or
you
multiple
always
killers.
yeah, well, usually multiple killers, yes, and I think that was the a really clever part of that first movie. But like, I think that's what keeps him also scary because it's always someone that's close to the people in the movie, but you never are quite sure who it is until the very end, and they have this murder mystery kind of element to it because of that. And I think that kind of like, even though they are kind of satirical, but like, and Ghostface kind of fumbles around a lot, which they do poke fun at in Scary Movie a lot too.
I'm in the
But I
house.
like
Can you
in that
see
first
me?
movie that he's just like they're these dumb kids, right? And then that's why they're fumbling around like a bunch of morons as they're trying to kill
Yeah, they just
everyone.
watch too many
And like,
movies, and they're both
yeah,
basically psychopaths. And
yeah,
what makes it even funnier, because again, like this has been a year removed, but like, um, the those performances are very heightened.
oh,
And
absolutely.
like
Matthew Lillard just going all
Matt with
out,
the tongue.
like, and
I
his
forgot how,
spittle and
like his tongue always
yeah,
sticking out, and like,
yeah.
and I mean, I get the other thing that was kind of a big selling point of that first movie was that Drew Barrymore was
Yeah.
basically the Janet Leigh of
And
Scream, right?
I like that they continued that. And I think that's just like a lot of fun, like with Sarah Michelle Gellar in the second one, or
Well, I would say
Jada
with the
Pinkett.
yeah, Jada Pinkett and Omar
Yeah,
Epps in the, which I
I would
also
say
really
the three
love
of
that
them.
opening.
Yeah, the
With that
second one at
sequence.
Stab, and then that whole
Yeah,
meta nature of the movie within a movie with Stab
but
is
also
just
talking about how black
so
characters are killed off first,
yes,
and
yeah.
making a point that like horror films are not always friendly to people of color.
And then they stay true to that, which is like kind of it's really, really interesting. And like the way that I'm watched the first 2 now. Nevis and I will watch 3 probably tonight, and then going into 4. And now we'll talk about the new trailer. But those first 2 movies, like, I think are a blast. Like, I don't think the second one is nearly as good as the first, personally, but like, I think the cast is great in that second movie with Timothy Olyphant.
He is so over the top in that
Yeah,
last scene where
and
he's talking about like going
yes,
prime time and
yeah,
things like that.
movies desensitized, yeah, like, and then Jerry O'Connell is great, and I think
But that
both those movies
cast is
are
kind of
is
incredible as
yeah,
well. Like Nevis tweeted about it yesterday, but like you watched like the film school scene where you have
right.
people. You mentioned Sarah Michelle Gellar, but you have Joshua
In
Jackson, you
one
have
scene,
Portia
yeah,
de Rossi, you have
yeah,
Rebecca Gayheart. Like
yeah.
it's fascinating to see like all these kind of like at that time up and coming actors in small supporting roles, and thinking like a lot of them are CW people too, you know, or
Mhm.
WB at that time.
And Kevin Williamson kind of had it, like, he was working on, didn't he just work with Sarah Michelle Gellar on I Know What You Did Last
It was
Summer?
around that
Or
same
yeah,
time, and then
and then like
even with that, like the producers of that also Neil H. Moritz also produced Cruel Intentions with Sarah Michelle
right,
Gellar,
yeah.
which I will admit had a huge crush on her as a kid.
Oh,
So
absolutely. Yeah, come on. But yeah, I think both movies are a blast. I think the first one is truly iconic, and just like the way that it deconstructs the slasher movie and the horror genre, like, I think is really, really clever. And like, using Halloween, which we're going to talk about that probably during our Halloween Kills review. We'll talk about the 1978 and 2018 movies probably in that review, but how they use that movie in this movie as they're watching it, and how
I'll be right back.
yeah, and the score from Halloween, like, as they're watching the movie and stuff, like, it's so well done.
Well, also
And
being self-referential, right? Like it even talks about Freddy Krueger at the beginning
yeah,
of the film.
absolutely. Yeah. And like, and even when he's like, Jamie Kennedy is yelling, Jamie, turn around, as like a ghost face is coming out behind him, who the meta nature of his name being Jamie Kennedy, and just him yelling Jamie, and just like so many little things like that.
I
And
hate
just
Randy though.
I
He's
like
so
Randy.
obnoxious.
He is, but like, I don't know. Like, I think he works as that character in this universe. Like, you needed that kind of character. And I mean, and I think it's the best thing Jamie Kennedy's done. But like,
I will agree with that.
um,
I find Jamie Kennedy is really obnoxious, but then again, I thought Simon Rex is the same thing. And like, look at him now, right? Like, just needs that
yeah.
right director. But then I really also love the Stab movie
Oh
universe as
yeah.
well, with Heather Graham
Luke
as
Wilson.
and Luke, yeah, goth Luke Wilson.
Yeah, it's so funny, man. Like, and when they introduced that in 2, which is just a remake of Scream, is just like, it's really, really great. And then as that progresses, like, and I can't wait to see in this new one. And let's transition into the new trailer.
And Tori Spelling, we
Um,
should also
yeah,
mention in
Tori
that
Spelling,
scene
which
where
they
she bumps.
referenced in the
Yeah,
first
and it's
movie
funny when they
too.
bump into each other, and it's just
Yeah,
like, and then also the other thing that I think is worth noting is that in the first one, Liev Schreiber's character is barely seen. He's
he's
just like
on a
on
news
news
thing
thing,
like
and then
for
he's
1 second.
prominent in part two as Cotton Weary, who
Yeah,
in the third movie I don't really
100%
like
cotton.
as a talk show. Amazing. Other
Yeah,
than that, not a huge fan of that movie, but that in itself is worth the justification of making a third
sure.
film.
Yeah. Um, and I'm sure we'll talk about the Scream franchise as a whole as we review Scream, which is another trend in horror movies that
Going back to the
our friend
basics.
Alex Reno just tweeted out, being like, please stop calling your legacy sequel the same name as the original movie, because it just gets confusing,
Yeah,
because now you got to go,
Scream, The Grudge,
yeah,
Halloween,
yeah, Halloween 3
Candyman.
times now.
Yeah.
Like, because the Rob Zombie one also just called Halloween. So
It
um
should that's what they should call it for the next reboot, is Halloween, 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 Halloween.
yeah, so I don't know whether to call it like Radio Silence's Scream or whatever you want to call it, but
Ready or
like,
Not's Halloween.
yeah. But then, so the trailer just dropped today. And doesn't show too much, and I'm sure a lot of this stuff out of context, or is maybe alternate takes or different things like that. Very much looks like a Scream movie. I like how they're playing with technology. Obviously the OG movies being on landlines with no caller ID and things like that. Obviously that's not the case now. So you have smart homes and things like that, text messaging. And I know they played a little bit of that with 4, but it's been a while, so I haven't rewatched that. So we'll save that conversation. But I do like the cast of this a lot too. You have people like you got
Is it
Jack Quaid
from
from The Boys, who I really like. You have Dylan Minnette. You have the one woman who was in The Leftovers in season 2 and part of 3. She was the daughter of
Are you talking about Jenna?
yeah, I'll find it. I should just pull up the cast here while we're talking. But Scream 2022. But Eric, what did you think of the trailer? Like,
I mean, I thought it was fine. I
Yeah.
think that like it's kind of doing what you mentioned in terms of the trend of recent horror movie reboots, where you get a glimpse of like, okay, what made the series popular. This is also the first film not to be directed by Wes Craven, who has
written
passed
by
away.
Kevin Williamson.
Even though I think it was part 3, Williamson was only given like a co-credit because Williamson also went off to direct Teaching Mrs. Tingle, which is terrible. Which again, like that's the other thing that Scream brought. I think that is maybe sort of the downside of those rebooted meta slasher movies, is that we got a whole bunch of them. I talked about Urban Legend earlier this year, rewatching that with the thespian known as Jared Leto in an early role, and so you got a lot of those in the late 90s, early 2000s with like you mentioned I Know What You Did Last Summer and I Still Know What You Did Last Summer. You had Valentine, you had Soul Survivor. There was a ton of those movies that kind of came out of the Scream sort of era, where you cast like up and coming teen idols or actors and in these kind of meta slasher flicks. And then with this, like watching it, it's like, okay, like it's paying homage to it. You're getting a lot of the legacy characters with Dale, Dewey and Gail, and Sydney coming back, and
one of them probably dies in the opening, right?
But I was thinking that again, to your point, there might be misdirection within the trailer, but I was thinking that it was the girl from The Leftovers that was kind of like the one that gets killed.
Jasmine
off.
Savoy Brown.
Oh no, it wasn't who I was thinking of. There's another actor. Are you on the Scream page, right?
Yeah.
Jenna
Ortega.
Yeah. Who's supposedly like an up and coming actor as well, who was in a movie called The Fallout that HBO Max picked up recently.
Right.
But yeah, I thought it was fine. I think it looks like a Scream movie, but again, like I remember having no interest in Scream 4 and then watching it and was just completely uninterested in it, other than
I
one
like
kill
Scream
with Aunt.
4.
I don't. But it's been a while. I will give it another shot. Yeah. But the only thing I really remember being kind of brutal and nasty about it was the one kill that when Anthony Anderson gets stabbed in the head. But then, like, even then, it was fascinating where it felt like Scream was old hat at that point when they were trying to reboot it, because then they did the series as well, right? Where
on MTV, which I didn't watch any of.
No,
and I had no interest in that, or I know a little bit of it. But even in that one, they already tried to cover the reboot or the remake kind of meta, commentary, right? So it'll be interesting with this one whether they tackle like the commentary on legacy sequels like we're getting with Halloween and a bunch of other kind of movies. Could be interesting. And I like that you're getting a different voice in here now. Like I did like Ready or Not. I like the Radio Silence guys. Like I think having new blood be introduced into Scream and give it a
that's already a horror movie title.
Yeah.
Friday the 13th Part 7, New Blood.
Sorry, that maybe that was intentional, Eric. It wasn't. I'm curious. Like I really hope. I remember enjoying Scream 4. Again, I don't remember much of it, which might be a good thing revisiting it, because again, even all of the Scream movies, it takes me a second to remember 2, 3, and 4. Like
they kind of blur together, right?
The first one I remember beat for beat, essentially. But then even starting the second one, I'm like, who is the killer in this one? And then immediately when the characters come on screen, I go, okay, now I remember this exactly.
It's Academy Award nominee Laurie Metcalf.
Yeah, and then the third one, in my head, I'm like, I don't remember. And then I'm sure.
I hate.
Don't say anything, because I will
You'll know who it is when it'll
they
come back
pop,
to you so
yeah.
quickly. But
Which
again,
is what's happened. And then
third,
I remember in the fourth one,
yeah,
what happens. But
well, I mean, the fourth one's kind of like, it makes perfect sense being who the daughter of this person is, and it's like, okay, they're going full Eric Roberts in this case.
Yeah, sure.
But with part 3, that's another one where I'm just so bored with that movie, and I just feel like it's setting up the whole idea that they're, the rule book is off the table in sort of the trilogy and the final act, and it never commits to any of that it's talking about. It's just the only thing that it really commits to is that you have to shoot the killer in the head. Like, it's not something where it's like, the killer is dead in one shot. They keep coming back, but like the idea of that, like anybody is vulnerable, even your sort of, again, legacy players, and it doesn't really commit to any of that. And it's like, and I'm gonna be honest, I don't really love the Gale and Dewey stuff either. I think that, like, I think it's fine. I just don't I don't think they're worth rooting for in terms of like, are they gonna get together? I mean, I don't mind David Arquette and Courtney Cox just as actors. David Arquette, I've come to actually respect a little bit more after watching the documentary "You Can't Kill David Arquette," who he just seems to be a big kid who is very sincere. But yeah, I just never really cared about like their relationship.
No, I'd agree with that. I don't think it's very fleshed out, at least even in these first two movies.
And it's such a focal point of all of those films, where it's like, that's like, you really root for them to both stay alive and together.
I do like that, it shows a little bit of growth with Gale, even though like in that she's such a bitch in those first two movies.
Oh, she's such an opportunistic asshole. And like,
I know that's why she wanted to play that character. And I agree with that. But like, I like that Dewey is so innocent and kind of bumbling and
has his own theme.
Like, from Broken Arrow. And like, I like that he is the only person that she can kind of bring her back down to earth and like ground her or make her care about something. And I know it's not totally fleshed out, but even like the thing at that, a little character building at the end of the second movie and even in the first one near the end too, where Gale is just awful throughout the whole movie, but like she cares about Dewey. So she like, it shows growth where at the end of the movie, the cameraman comes back who's like, fuck this. I don't want to be like, you guys are nuts, like I'm leaving. And then he comes back at the end and she's just like, okay, he's like, let's go live, like she does at the end of the first movie, and she goes with Dewey in the which that guy can be stabbed 800 times and still survive.
Oh yeah, I mean, I guess that is also sort of another joke where like it's almost like it's playing on like, oh, he's in peril, and then it's like, like serial killers in these movies, he's the one victim that you stab 100 times, and he just has a bit of a limp in the sequels. But it's also strange considering how weirdly episodic these movies are. Like Dewey's sister, played by Rose McGowan, is killed in the first one, and it really doesn't seem to have that much of an impact on him in terms of his personality moving forward.
That's a great point, actually. Yeah, because I never even thought of that. Yeah, she's the one that's in the garage door, right?
Yeah,
like in the first one. And yeah, that's not really even like explored that much.
No, where like the sheriff in Halloween, in the original Halloween, his daughter Annie is killed, and then in the second movie, like there is actual sort of grief and loss,
and he's coming back for Halloween Kills.
Yeah,
too, right?
so like it's like I found that really weird. Like it's almost like she really like Rose McGowan's actually really good in that first movie. It didn't need to be the sister. It's so weird. It's like, oh, like they never really even mention it again,
Yeah, I know, it's very weird. But yeah, I'm excited for this new one. I like the cast. I like that they're bringing back the main cast, and I really do feel like it could be one of them getting killed off in the opening. I wouldn't even be surprised if it's Nev Campbell getting killed off in the opening.
It would be amazing if it was David Arquette playing himself at the Scream house where you can now rent an Airbnb getting killed. That would be the ultimate meta joke. It's like in order to stop another Scream movie being made, a Scream-esque killer is killing off the cast members of the original Scream movie.
Would love that. Would love that. But yeah, I think the trailer, it gives you glimpses and might be spoilers, might not be spoilers, but it looks
Well, it's
like
like Marvel, right? Where
I
like
love
there's certain misdirections
they
in the
might have shot different
trailers. Yeah.
scenes, and like I know they're being very protective over spoilers and stuff like that, but I like some of the shots in this of like the shadow of Ghostface on the wall, like I thought was really, really cool. And like there's some interesting cinematography stuff, and Ghostface does look menacing in this, and I'm sure it'll be much like Halloween.
Or
uh
Scary Movie 1.
like very violent, like very, and the Scream movies have always been very violent with the
Oh, they're
gutting and
brutal.
the
Like I wonder if we'll see that much blood, because like that
I
first
do
movie
think we will,
specifically.
probably, with Ready or Not being as bloody as it
Yeah.
is.
Well,
Like,
like that first scene though, specific, or not the first scene, the scene with Matthew Lillard and Skeet Ulrich where they're stabbing each other
yeah, it's
is
brutal.
really
Yeah, and
nasty.
even the gutting of the characters at the beginning, the pole through the head in the second one, like it gets very gory, and so like I think they'll amp that up, and
The only one that's
I'm
funny is Henry Winkler when like he's hanging on
yeah.
the pole and all the students want to
Go see him
see.
for I'm like, that's really morbid. But I'm really curious to see what meta commentary they have on this, because obviously they've touched on sequels, they've touched on reboots kind of thing. So I'm like, I'm really curious of what that meta narrative will be in this movie, and like what stab they're on, or is it a stab reboot that they're on? Because I think, or did they touch on that in Scream 4? I forget, but like
Well, I think maybe they even touched upon it, maybe on the show, because like I feel like if you're like, I don't even,
the
again, we
show's
haven't
not
watched the
canon
show.
though, right?
No, but I
I
think
don't
Wes
think
Craven
so.
was involved with it. Wasn't he an executive producer and shot the
Yeah,
first episode?
Williamson was a part of it too, I think, but I don't know if it was necessarily canon.
God, Kevin
Um,
Williamson, man, what a wild ride that guy had
yeah,
in the late 90s. Like
yeah.
I rewatched The Faculty, and that movie does not hold up, and I know a lot of people do like that movie directed by Robert Rodriguez, but like there was a point where that guy had like a blank check,
Robert
and
Rodriguez actually shot the stab stuff too, right?
which
I
all comes
think.
full circle.
Yeah,
But like thinking about like how, yeah, some of the stuff in those Scream movies are of the late 90s, and it is a little bit of a time capsule now, and you just kind of have to accept it for what it is. But I look at The Faculty, and it's like, when you compare and contrast, Scream could have become The Faculty in so many other ways, where like the references to Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and also like, we've made fun of Zombieland in the past for putting like text on the screen. I forgot that The Faculty
does that?
introduces every
Yeah.
character and like does like sort of a freeze frame, and then blasts their name in like this bloody red text, and it's like Josh Hart in it. It's like Zeke, and you're just
So
like, get
obnoxious.
out of
Yeah,
here! It's so
yeah,
bad. It's so
yeah. No, I
bad.
feel you. And then final things. Yeah, I'm curious of what the stab stuff in this movie will be, what the meta narrative will be. Obviously the killer, like theories from me is like, I don't think you go and give like one of the OG cast being the killer, because that would feel really off. But I do
It'd be
think that
amazing if it was Matthew Lillard, but with like a TV set on his head.
dude, I wouldn't put it past them that there's someone in this movie that is from one of those previous three that we either thought was dead or was just, forgotten about and only in one of the movies or something, that they do bring back as the killer in this. Because like I'm trying to think like how you throw audiences off nowadays, and a twist ending I think is really hard to pull off now, and it very rarely like works anymore. And I don't know
Well,
if
look
it's
at
just the
Star
age.
Wars: Rise of Skywalker with
Yeah,
how they brought back the Emperor. Like, do
yeah.
they do the same thing with Jerry O'Connell?
The dead speak. No, I wouldn't be surprised if, yeah, there's something like that where you thought a character died and they didn't.
Do you
And I
remember
know
me, Sydney?
whether that feels really cheap, probably, but like I'm almost okay with it, just because if it pulls a fast one on us, and like I want these movies to kind of be silly and self-referential and like and stuff like that. So like that's my theory, my out of the blue, like just I have no idea, but I think it could be a character that is uncredited, that is from one of the other movies that I think could be in this, and they're keeping it a secret. So that's my theory. Or it'll be one of these new people that
Or it'll
we,
be Kevin Williamson.
yeah. Yeah, it's yeah.
That would be good.
So
I
anyways,
am the creator of your pain.
I'm excited. January scares me a little bit, but
Scary wary.
yeah, I I'm okay with it coming out in January. I would have liked it just to come out this month, but like
Well, given the world that we live in now, just in
the
terms
rules are
of
throw the rules at the window, right?
yeah, in terms of theatrical releases, I mean, January is it's not going to be eligible for Oscars, but I mean, Scream never was, and I do agree with you. I think it would have been better to maybe strike while the lightning or while the while it's hot.
25th anniversary this
Yeah,
year. Yeah, like I really wish they pushed it
but I
for
guess they
this
don't want
year.
to compete with Halloween Kills with like just
Yeah, I'm
although,
assuming that's the main reason,
but then again, maybe they would have changed their mind if they knew that if Halloween Kills, because the decision to release that in
on
the
Peacock.
US on
Yeah.
Peacock maybe was something that was so last minute, where maybe they would have had more confidence if they knew that was happening.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I'm excited.
And it's also with Paramount now, we should say that as well, which
Right,
is kind
because
of interesting.
Miramax
Yeah.
also obviously not around
But
anymore. So
Lionsgate is I think releasing or is it Paramount that's because Lionsgate's been getting a lot of the Miramax titles, but maybe it is Paramount that has the 4K version of.
you mean on of Scream?
Yeah.
Like the OG one? I'm not sure who the home video stuff. I think I was reading that didn't Paramount. No, that was the Bond stuff.
I'm
I
going to look
think.
on
Yeah.
Blu-ray.com right now to
Yeah,
confirm
you can
this.
find that out, and we'll move on to our next segment, which is just what else have we been watching? I gotta take a time code, everyone. Pardon me. So Eric, what else? I mean, I
It
can
is
kind of go
Paramount,
into.
and it is coming out on October 19th.
Oh, there you go. So next week we were kind of right. What else have we been watching? What else have I been watching?
You've been watching
Well,
Squid Games?
Squid Game, yeah. I finished all 9 episodes of Squid Game. The show that has kind of taken over the internet, or the number one show in every territory on Netflix, and which I think is cool to see, because like I don't think it's very often you see an international feature or television show become like the talked about show on Netflix or just anywhere, which I think it's really, really cool to kind of see a Korean television show, obviously produced for Netflix, but like, which makes it available worldwide. But like, it is just really cool when something like this kind of takes off. And I'll admit that it was not on my radar. I think we probably had access to it for the last, while through our screener stuff on Netflix. And I probably just scrolled past it going, oh, okay, cool. Korean show about, murder games. I've seen
And
that
potentially
before, whatever.
Squidward showing up.
Yeah. And then probably just thought nothing of it. And then you started to see, the internet kind of blow this thing up, and I'll admit that it took a while, and I started to see everyone talk about it, and I'm like, all right, I'll give this thing a shot. And Nevis and I powered through all 9 episodes in 3 episode chunks, so it kind of took us just 3 or 4 days to get through it, and enjoyed the shit out of it. I think there's way more emotional depth than I was expecting. I think the cast is fantastic. Please, for the love of God, watch this subtitled and not dubbed. I think the games are creative and fun. It's disturbing and violent. The cinematography, I think, the colors that are used in the set design, set direction and design, I think are really great. Kind of the quirkiness of what the people look like with their red suits with the shapes, almost like the PlayStation controller buttons and stuff like that, which is interesting. I just thought it was really, really good, and I understand why it kind of took off. And a murder game kind of thing isn't necessarily anything new, but
Well, you think of Battle Royale, you think of the Hunger
yeah,
Games,
there's countless things
the
that
Running
are,
Man.
that are this concept. And I think I think people enjoy this genre, this subgenre, right? And
There's something about a dystopian society where people can gamble with the lives of others, knowing that nothing will happen to them, which is living vicariously through those characters as you're watching it, which
yeah,
is kind of weirdly subversive in
yes,
sort of its
exactly.
depiction of this kind of society that's willing to sacrifice people for entertainment purposes.
Yeah, and I think that the show's just paced really, really well. a good twist at the end. I think the games, being children's games, I think are really interesting, and you learn about different games that they played in Korea and things like that. I do think that, which is funny, I tweeted this out, and our friend Andrew Feigl messaged me about it too, of like the English language actors in the show. They bring in some Americans at one point to the show, are just the worst. And it actually took me out of a couple episodes because they prominently feature these Americans that come to kind of watch the games be played near the end of it and stuff like that. And it is just some of the worst acting I've seen in a very long time in a mainstream kind of,
I wonder if
you
the
know.
dub version would change that, just in
So
terms of
that's
like,
the other
that
thing
would be curious.
yeah, that's, I don't think they would, right? And
Yeah.
that's what's interesting, and why I think people should definitely watch. And I was talking with my younger cousin Charlie at Thanksgiving yesterday. He's 16, and he watched it, and he's just like, man, I put the dub on for a second. He's like, it was the worst. I'm like, thank God, Charlie. He's just like, he was like, it was so emotionless and like just stilted. And I was like, yes, that's exactly it. And that also wouldn't work because there's also a character from Pakistan who's an immigrant to Korea who speaks Korean throughout the show, and he also speaks his native language at one point. And I wondered, it in the dub, like, do they dub that as well, or is that subtitled because it's not in Korean? And then the English language people, I'm like, that wouldn't play correctly, even though like it probably sounds more accurate to the actual dub being
Like you would have like
emotionless.
all
And like,
the English dub characters saying, "What's he saying? I don't understand what he's saying," but he's
yeah,
speaking English in
it's
the
just
English dub.
it's very, and I've heard even the subtitles aren't great, like from people who speak and can understand Korean. They're just like, you lose a lot of the nuance in it from, the subtitles aren't the greatest, I've heard as
Well,
well.
subtitling is a whole other conversation when it comes
Yeah,
to sort of, taking something from, its native country and presenting it internationally. Like there's a whole sort of art form when it comes to getting that translation,
accurate. And
yeah,
yeah.
accurate, but also kind of making it, because again, like you have to think like the nuances are the biggest challenge when it comes to adapting.
And even cultural differences and stuff, like there are certain ways people say things or referencing that you wouldn't necessarily get what that is, so you have to kind of Americanize it or anglicize
Especially
it,
with
like in
kids
a
stuff.
way.
Like I find like a lot of
Yeah,
kids like anime, like Pokemon's like the biggest example where like in the 90s when you had like this anime boom, like a lot of the English dubs would basically change, both historical and cultural context to a lot of
yeah,
things and try to find the most sort of American in relation to those
yeah,
things.
just so people can kind of still connect with it, right? So I have also heard that, but I had no problem with the subtitled version. Like I still enjoyed it immensely. Yeah, I just thought it built really well. I thought the games were structured really well. The character development throughout it I wasn't expecting. And like kind of this subplot with a police officer who has the greatest iPhone battery of all time. I want to know what battery he got custom installed in his iPhone, because it lasts like a week. I'm like, whoa. And like,
It's the future, man.
yeah, and it's really solid. I think you should check it out. Like, I understand why it blew up, and part of me goes, okay, now this is gonna mean we're gonna get a US based Squid Game show that's gonna be either season 2 of this, or there'll be a spin-off show that's in English with big name actors and things like that, because this really screams as something that they weren't expecting to be as big as it got, right? Like Netflix makes a lot of international stuff that we just don't hear about because it's popular in the country that they made it for.
Yeah, they
And
don't
like
necessarily advertise, international productions the
but
same
they
way
have a
that they do
lot
in
of
North
it,
America.
yeah.
I mean, they have a lot of
um
content to begin with anyways, whether it be
and they make
English
country
speaking or
specific,
otherwise.
yeah, and they make content specific to different regions for sure. It's just we don't like Dark, I guess, is the other one that kind of took off, but maybe not even on the same level as Squid Game, which is a German sci-fi show, very that I've heard is great. Did you watch any of Dark or
No, I
no?
didn't, but I know what you're
Yeah,
talking about. And
I've
yeah, like,
heard people say that's great as well, but
yeah, it's just also interesting to think like Netflix in terms of what their series sort of the longevity of what their television series or limited series are, because you look at this time last year, a lot of people, as we went into November, were talking about the Queen's Gambit.
Yeah.
And now nobody talks about it whatsoever. Or at the
Yeah.
beginning of the pandemic with the Tiger King, like
Yeah.
now
we're getting a
nobody
sequel.
yeah, but nobody talks about that show anymore. It was
No,
like
I
the
agree,
perfect
yeah.
time, where I wonder with Squid Game if it'll be similar, where it's like, okay, this is another kind of
Flash in the pan kind of thing.
yeah,
Or is it
not to
gonna
say that
be
the
a
quality isn't good. I'm just saying that
Yeah.
like it's the next filler until we get whatever comes up next that's from Netflix that kind of maybe hits the same way.
And I think with some of those, like Queen's Gambit, very much a limited series, where this uh does leave it. I'm not spoiling anything. Like it's season 1, or it feels like season 1, and they could go a multitude of different routes with this. But I think that, to me, this is more Stranger Things than it is Queen's Gambit, in the sense that I do feel like they will capitalize on this, and it could continue and be popular in uh I think we'll get a second season of this storyline, and I also think we'll get an American version uh of this as well. And I could see it kind of, I think people will anticipate season 2. And I think, but even Stranger Things has that problem where people it's the thing we talk about Netflix all the time, where it is like, look at Midnight Mass. It's like,
Which I'll talk about after this, because I watched the whole
which
series.
is like, people will talk about it for a week and then it kind of goes away, right?
Yep.
And then that's just kind of the Netflix model, and they put out so much stuff that doesn't really bother them. Because I think when we talked about the Tadum event, we had the same conversation, right? Where it is very much like, what's hot that week on Netflix. People talk about it for maybe 2 weeks, because Squid Games looks like it took a little bit of time for people to kind of, go, oh, what's this Squid Game show people
The
are
word of
talking
mouth
about?
series
And, like,
on Netflix.
yeah. So people on Twitter, my sister hearing about it, and she's like, oh, I should watch that. And it's been out for 2 or 3 weeks. So there are those shows that the word of mouth makes it kind of last maybe a month or so. But like, that seems like the cap on things, where most stuff,
but also
is
being
like,
Korean, I think maybe there was a delay there, but maybe the delay, and again, I don't like thinking this way, but I maybe even with the success of Parasite more recently, kind of prompting people to be a little bit more adventurous when it comes to Korean filmmaking and television in general, where like, it's like, I saw Parasite and I really, really liked that, and now I'm hearing that this weird kind of genre Korean show is on Netflix and everybody's talking about that. Maybe
and if
I'll give that a
Korean
go.
movies and TV can be the gateway to international cinema to people, like, I'm all for it. Like, if that's going to be the thing, if people go, oh, Parasite won Best Picture, I really like that. Oh, Squid Game is blowing up on Netflix, I really like that. Maybe let's try, XYZ. Like,
maybe I'll go back and watch, Park Chan-wook's Old Boy, or something,
and then
like
even
that
then goes into some other region of cinema or something, going like, oh, these are great and they're subtitled. Like, I should give other subtitled movies and TV shows a shot, and then go into something else. But I guarantee that, unfortunately, I bet you 60% or more of people watch this dubbed. I would
probably
love
didn't
to see
even
those
notice
stats.
either, right? Like, or didn't care about, like, didn't really think that the performance really changed or anything.
I will say, on my Netflix, the default language was Korean. I don't know if that, because they used to do the default language as English because they were afraid of, like, on Dark, I remember that trailer playing and it was in English. And even the way that series opens is a voiceover. So it kind of tricks you right off the bat. And you're like, oh, okay. And then as people start speaking, you're like, oh, it's not matching up. And you're like, oh, this sounds awful. And you're like, oh, it's dubbed. And
well,
then
sometimes when we get screeners in advance to watch, like I was thinking, like with Alexander Aja's Oxygen, when I got that, it was set to English, and I was watching that and I was just thinking, like, Melanie Laurent also speaks English, but it was a completely different voice.
Did she do her own dub? No, she didn't.
It sounded almost like Nicole
Oh yeah, we
Kidman.
talked about this. We're like, why didn't they just get her to dub it? And I said I would have liked them to do 2 different versions of the movie.
Yeah.
Where, like, you'd have to shoot every scene twice, which is double the amount of work and double the amount of everything. But I think that could have been, if you're going to go that route where you're going to give people the option.
Or you just do the Italian way, where, like, you have everybody speaking their, native tongue, and then you just dub it all in English.
Right. But then like something like Snowpiercer, I think does a cool job with blending the languages, right? And even having the translation device and stuff like that. But
Yeah. But that's
anyways,
also
please.
very smart writing. Like, I feel like a lot of
Absolutely.
people
Yeah.
aren't considering that, where it's like Bong Joon-ho is a very solid and clever writer, where it comes to like, okay, I know how to do this and make an international film. And I mean, he's benefiting from genre as well and setting in a kind of, dystopian society on this train. But yeah, he's such a good writer that it's not everybody's maybe thinking on that level, which is
Yeah, and I don't.
unfortunate.
Yeah, and going back to Squid Game, just to wrap up, like if I think they'll do a season 2, and I said they could go the entirely American route for a spin-off or something. What I would like to see is like, because it became so popular, maybe you introduce, like, you already had American and English speaking characters on this season. Maybe you just now go, okay, we should probably cast those people as like legitimately good actors and not just, like you said, people we picked up off from a bus stop or whatever. Like, it
Yeah.
just feels like they're definitely not trained actors that they used for this, or just really like, low budget kind of D movie actors or whatever. No offense to the people, I'm sorry, but like it wasn't up to snuff. And I think you could go the route of going more international in season 2, and much like, when Bong Joon-ho does his, like, American stuff, where there is a lot, Korean speaking people in the movie mixed with English and stuff like that. Like, I think you could cast maybe a couple people that are big name actors that would be in season 2, and then you kind of do something that route.
Well, it's an
But I'm not sure.
international company, right? That's in the film.
Yes. So
Yeah.
like, yeah, they allude to that, this isn't just in Korea, but like even with these men who come and bid on the Squid Games, and that's not a spoiler for anyone, like but
It's very
it's
it's a common trope within the
in that
genre of,
subgenre,
yeah,
yeah.
we talked about like people sort of vicariously sort of getting that rush or that thrill of pitting uh you know people against one another in sort of a sort of a death scenario, right?
Yeah. So I could see this being an international kind of organization, or there are other spin-offs of Squid Game in other countries, and they all kind of connect. And it's this, kind of like the silliness in Escape Room of that company that kind of runs these, like, it reminded me of that, right? Like,
Well, I mean,
people
it's
like
like even
murder
something like in
games, like,
Lost, right, with
yeah.
Dharma, right? Like
Yeah.
it's
So I think you could incorporate, if you need to Americanize it even more, like you could keep it true to what that show originally was and introduce a little bit of that. But I don't even know that you need it. Like, you saw that it took off being a purely Korean production, and I mean, it's going to be inevitable. It's going to happen whether it's an American spinoff
I am inevitable.
or they introduce more, A-list actors in future seasons of Squid Game.
You'll probably
Um,
see a significant bump in terms of both
budget and
budget and sort of resources with casting,
I wouldn't
where
say it looks cheap at all though. Like, it
right.
looks like the production design and stuff, I think is really great.
No,
But
no, no.
yeah,
I'm just saying more in terms of like, okay, Netflix now sees this as
as a premiere thing on their
yeah.
service, right?
So
Yeah.
they're gonna be maybe more controlling as well. I mean, who knows? Right.
That's also true. But I hope they suit, because it's violent and disturbing at times, and I think the emotional beats are really solid, and the character dynamics and the buildup of, just learning these people and their sort of backstories, and how it handles, debt, crippling debt and stuff like that. And I think is something that I thought was really, really interesting. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. I think, yeah, everyone, if you haven't checked it out yet, you've probably heard a ton of people talk about it. So uh, definitely check out Squid Game. And then, Eric, the other show, we can transition into that. You have been watching, or you watched all of Midnight Mass,
I
right?
sure did, Matt. Mike Flanagan's kind of it's an original series from him, a limited series, but it's also still very much in sort of the style of what you'd expect a Stephen King adaptation to be like. Um,
I'm going to the
uh,
bathroom. Sorry.
yeah, no, that's all good. And so watching it, the I think the main sort of takeaway from the series has been is that it's very sort of dialogue driven, and it's monologues and conversations with this kind of tinge of horror on the sidelines as the story kind of unfolds on this sort of small island community that, you know, the population has been dwindling over the years just due to, you know, lack of job opportunities on the island, and also, you know, people kind of just wanting to get away from a very kind of Christian community that's also been suffering over you know, the last few decades. And sort of the point of view is from multiple characters over the course of the series. And it kind of all starts to kind of come together when this new priest comes to the island, and he's basically taking over for the older one, and he's played by Hamish Linklater. And so with that, you know, his presence and his um sort of charisma sparks interest in the church again and gets more people coming. And one day he performs this awe-inspiring miracle that basically has everybody sort of coming to him as a modern day faith healer. But as you find out, as the story progresses, there's, you know, some insidious underpinnings with his character, but even with the town, of being sort of, you know, what it means to be Christian, and sort of the idea of, you know, treating people as though you would want to treat yourself, and sort of the hypocrisy and rhetoric that kind of is behind all of that. I found it to be really satisfying and fulfilling. And again, I think it takes a lot of the best qualities of a Stephen King novel and sort of adds textures and nuance that isn't necessarily always there in Stephen King adaptations. Because as much as I love The Mist, I look at the Marcia Gay Harden character in that, and that character is a very exaggerated, over the top antagonist, where there's a character in Midnight Mass that's actually not far removed from who, you know, Marcia Gay Harden's character is in The Mist, but she's played as more of a person, even though she's still very much reprehensible in some of the things that she does. um there's more sort of shades of gray there, and complexity that I think plays out really well. And yeah, it's kind of like the best versions of Needful Things and Salem's Lot kind of mashed together. And if you're looking for maybe, you know, classic chills and thrills, you're not going to be wholly satisfied, because it is very sort of existential in its conversations, but also looking at things like honor and purpose. And, you know, the characters themselves are very flawed. One of your main characters, played by Zach Gilford, is a man who we're first introduced to having been successful leaving the island and becoming kind of a white collar kind of Wall Street kind of type. Is being arrested and going to jail because he was in a drinking and driving accident and killed a young woman, and is sort of haunted by that, but, you know, gets off easy and sort of only spends, I think, like 4 years in prison. And you know, is a character who's both, you know, amoral for what he has done, but he's also still somewhat sympathetic because he is remorseful and, you know, understands the crime that he's committed. And it's just interesting to see that that character in any other film or show would either be a complete pariah, which he kind of is, but at the same time there would be no sort of redemptive arc for him. He would just be someone who is continually going down a spiral that, you know, is getting worse, where it does show that this guy, you know, is trying to do the right thing, and sort of, again, pitting being rational versus, you know, seeing something that is supernatural or fantastical, and sort of grappling with the idea of whether or not, you know, this is biblical or not. And I think that there's a lot going on there in terms of even just, you know, Mike Flanagan sort of maybe fighting with his own upbringing in terms of, like, clashing with what it meant to be, a Catholic at one point, and maybe kind of having moved away from the church. Those kind of themes are very prominent in movies from, even Martin Scorsese, where like,
Yeah.
you see a guy that's conflicted with his own faith and sort of being.
I think that's what intrigues me the most about it too, because I
Yeah.
grew up Catholic, and I have heard that like from other people being like, oh, it was watching with their partner. One person grew up Catholic, one person didn't. They're like, oh, the weirdest part was when they were like reciting some of the prayers in the movie and stuff like, or in the show and stuff like
Yeah.
that too. And
Well, it also makes a really good point, and the one that I've always had when it comes to religion is like, okay, well, if there is a God, why has he or she or whoever allowed, famine and genocide and all these horrible things to happen?
happen
Not
to good
like,
people or
yeah,
innocent
or
people.
just
Yeah.
people in general, and
Yeah.
like not, things that some sort of divine intervention would be needed in day-to-day life, but like the Holocaust, like things
Truly
like that.
horrible
Yeah.
things. Yeah. That aren't just, yeah. I think Flanagan has been killing it lately, and like I do want to go back and even watch Doctor Sleep again, and and Haunting of Hill House, because like I don't even think I finished the last 4 episodes or something of that, or 3 episodes of that. I didn't
You did
love.
finish Bly Manor,
Yeah, which
right?
I didn't love. You watched it too?
No, I
Yeah.
haven't, which I'm thinking
Oh,
of watching, because it was
okay.
just one I missed, and like it was weird because like I really liked what he was doing with the last sort of anthology series,
Yeah,
and that I was kind of satisfied or fulfilled with
with
that,
Hill
and I kind
House.
of, yeah, and I just
Yeah.
felt like I didn't need any more,
Yeah,
weirdly.
and I'm curious to see what you'll think, because I do like elements of that show, and I weirdly finished that but didn't finish Hill House, because I think we just didn't finish Hill House in that October, and then once November hit, it's Christmas time, and then I was just like, I can't watch this anymore, and then I never went back to it. But like we've wanted to, and maybe we'll throw that on during this spooky season. But like I'd have to rewatch it from the beginning now, I think. But I missed those last 4 episodes, and then Bly Manor kind of fell apart for me at the end, and I don't think any of the emotional stuff really quite works, and I thought the last episode was kind of laughably bad. But I do like Flanagan, like in his style of horror, or his style of filmmaking, and I want to watch that 3-hour director's cut of Doctor Sleep that's
Same.
in chapters and stuff like that. Like I've been, it's in 4K on the digital version, even the extended cut, director's cut, and I've been itching to go back and watch that. And it's another excuse to watch The Shining again, because the 4K of The Shining also looks great. Everyone, you should
But I think
watch
Netflix
that.
is a
But
good place for him because
yeah,
he can do these sort of longer run
limited
series,
series. Yeah,
limited series, and like I mean, it was already announced that he's now working on like an Edgar Allan Poe inspired
like anthology
mini
series.
series or
Yeah.
anthology series. And so like I think like, if he's given like 7 to 8 episodes to tell a story and really flesh things out, I think like you can, like, even his look, like he has a look to his film that I sometimes really like and I sometimes don't. It's very soft, and
Yes,
like
it's
it
got
has,
that orangey lighting to it, kind of as well.
yeah,
Sometimes, or yellowy, kind
it's
of.
almost weirdly like, again, like it has like this kind of like sort of cream like kind of texture to it,
Yeah,
where
I
like,
totally understand what you're saying. Yeah.
yeah, and like I think it, like it's warm, it's weirdly warm for horror, and I just think that that's kind of interesting as well, even though I don't think it always works with what's going on with any given scene, where you have, maybe some of the more kind of graphic moments that take place in some of his films and series, and it's yeah, it's just it's interesting to think like the guy who made Oculus kind of moved into Stephen King territory and now is doing some of his own things, but stuff that's inspired by, people like Henry James and things like that. But it all kind of feels of the same cloth, and like his kind of evolution, his voice hasn't really kind of gone away. And it's just also interesting as well that a lot of the actors that he's been working with throughout the entirety of his career he continues to use, and I always find that that's
Elliot,
interesting. Yeah, with Henry Thomas and Katie
his
Siegel, and
wife, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, there's a lot of like kind of like,
Rahul Kohli he brought back, because you
yeah,
didn't
who's
watch
actually,
Bly.
No, but
Yeah.
he's really good in Midnight Mass as sort of the town sheriff who is dealing with racism because he is of the Muslim faith, and he's the only him and his son in the show are the only two Muslims. But I really love how he sort of deals with this local town drunk who's also kind of a pariah, who's done something horrible in the past, but he still treats this guy with more humanity and dignity than anybody else treats him on the show. And it's just one of those really solid performances. And there's a great scene where the character talks about like why they came to the town in the first place.
Okay, cool. I like Raul a lot. Again, friend of Kind of Funny. He's been on their show a bunch, and they're friends with him. But
He's very good in it. He's very
yeah,
good.
he was good in Bly Manor. He's one of my favorite parts.
Great
of that
mustache.
show. In Bly Manor, he had. Does he have a mustache in this too?
He's got like a mustache and beard
like,
combo,
beard
but it
combo,
really like
yeah.
it kind of works with kind of like that rustic lived-in community.
Is it a period piece or is it set in like?
No, it's modern.
Okay, it's modern.
Yeah.
Cool.
But it does have a kind of timeless quality because a lot of the film or a lot of the series takes place on this island, and the island itself is kind of like it feels like it's 50 years in the past.
Okay, that's kind of probably why I got that vibe. But
Yeah.
I'm excited to check it out. I just haven't.
It almost
gotten
weirdly reminds me of like Peterborough, where it's like
Okay,
like
cool.
time hasn't touched it completely, and it
Sure.
still looks like there are things from like the early 90s that are still.
I agree. Yeah. That's I think it'll be the next show now that we finished Squid Game, so perfect transition there. Eric, before we wrap up what we've been watching, I do need to touch on that we saw Copshop. So
Yes.
when we went to go see, we haven't talked about it on his show, right?
No, we
'Cause
haven't.
didn't,
No.
because we didn't do a show last week. So Eric and I, after seeing Venom Let There Be Carnage, which you can check out our review for, which I'm sure you've seen because we didn't touch on this in the news too, but it did wild business, $90 million its opening weekend, unfortunately. And we did a whole conversation on the post-credit scene, which you guys can check out on YouTube and podcast services. I accidentally deleted it over our Spider-Man No Way Home trailer reaction too.
But you can still watch that on
Yeah.
the YouTube channel.
Yeah.
It's not deleted from there.
So Eric and I saw Copshop. We don't need to spend too much time on it because we didn't do like a full review. I guess Many Saints of Newark we can talk about in this kind of section too.
The dead speak.
Yeah, that's true. I loved Copshop more than Many Saints of Newark. Maybe loved is a strong word.
Fun. You had fun with it.
I had a lot of fun with Copshop. Like I didn't know it would be this kind of single location assault on precinct 13,
Rio Bravo-esque siege movie.
And I just had a blast. I think Toby Huss is just
Anthony Lamb
is just so good in the movie.
He's good in general. Like I love that guy anytime he pops up. Like he's also in David Gordon Green's Halloween.
He's great.
He's
butter on my penis.
He's just one of those guys who's always like a welcome presence.
Yeah, Frank Grillo does look like Mickey Rourke. And
Whiplash.
Whiplash. And,
which would make a great What If episode.
Yeah, and I just think, him and Gerard Butler hamming it up and being stuck in this police cell. And is it Alexis Louder?
Who's awesome in this. Yeah. And like this, she was also in the Tomorrow War. She had a small role in that. But like, it is a great star-making performance. The only unfortunate thing is that nobody saw the movie, and it's like it's one of those things where it's like you can tell like if I hope some casting director or some filmmaker watched Copshop and saw it, because like I feel like you could do like a whole series of films of like action movies with her.
I absolutely agree.
A great presence,
and the movie just like has this kind of trashy vibe to it, but like this B-movie vibe to it that I think a lot of Joe Carnahan's recent stuff kind of has that vibe too. And
we also released Boss Level earlier this year with Frank Grillo as well,
which I didn't see,
which is fine. It's using the Groundhog Day sort of formula with kind of the video game sort of component of restarting your life over and over again in order to solve the problem that you're kind of stuck in. With this, I think this is more entertaining because it is just playing on classic genre,
It's
and
nasty and violent.
yeah, and it's kind of like your old school neo-noir B movie Western
It's
kind of
weird with the
thing.
Toby Huss stuff. Like,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
just
where
like,
he's kind of playing sort of like the true sort of like Anton Chigurh-esque villain
yeah.
of the piece, and like his stuff in it is amazing. Like he like when he literally steals the whole film.
Oh, and
Um
he's just a pure psychopath, and
yeah,
it's just
but
he's
he's
so
just so
good at
funny
it.
the way that he kind of
Yeah.
presents himself as like a, you know, a guy who's like selling balloons.
Yes. And yeah, I had an absolute blast with it. And I'm very curious too, because there's all the behind the scenes stuff. Frank Grillo came out and said that, you know, the
He
movie got
wasn't happy
okay
with
reviews, but
the
like
edit.
he said critics were kind of, you know, saying his performance wasn't so great and he wasn't happy with the edit because they took the movie away from Joe Carnahan, and it was like a studio edit. And Eric and you and I were talking after we saw it, and we're like, the movie's like just a solid, pretty
He's
straightforward,
fine in
like
it. Like Frank Grillo's
siege movie,
fine.
and Grillo's fine. Gerard Butler's fine.
I
Like,
actually kind of like Gerard Butler too. I just like,
yeah.
it's so weird that that like what he has become, Gerard
Oh yeah.
Butler. It like, I mean, he is. It's he's not maybe on that same level of
Like the
Bruce
directed
Willis or
DVD.
Nicolas
Yeah.
Cage
Like,
just yet, but he
yeah.
is literally looking
Oh,
down
he's
that
teetering.
drain.
He's
Yeah.
teetering. He's on a tightrope. He's just like he's one of those guys that is like making those movies, but they're like elevated versions of those movies where you're like, this could go either way. It's either going to be like one of those movies, or it's going to be slightly more enjoyable for like a trashy reason.
Like he has
Or something
another
like
movie that he
Like,
just finished making called The Plane, which sounds like that kind of movie where it's like, okay,
yeah.
this could go either it's going to be really fun and entertaining, or this should have just been released on VOD.
Yeah.
And you know, I actually really like that he's got a little bit more heft and sort of grizzle to him in
Yeah.
the last 10 years or so. Like he's got more character now, and I just kind of like him as a personality more so than anything else. I don't think he's necessarily a great actor, but I just think he's an interesting presence.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. And I'd just be very curious to see. I'm assuming the Joe Carnahan cut was a little bit more stylized
More
and
kinetic.
kinetic, that, you know, his stuff usually feels that way. So maybe they just wanted something more straightforward. And that's
Which I
why,
think it works. I think
yeah,
that if you made like, there's one sort of flashback in Copshop where I think like if it was sort of edited by or approved by Joe Carnahan, it would have been sort of more breakneck sort of speed in the way that like Smokin' Aces or something like that. But then
yes.
again, I mean, I every time I talk about Joe Carnahan, I say like he doesn't really have a great movie in his career, with the exception of The Gray, which is this weird anomaly. Also with
Right.
Frank Grillo, who's
Yeah.
really good in that movie too.
Yeah.
And it's just like, where did that film come from
I
in the
know, The
rest of your
Gray is
career?
fantastic. Yeah. Like it's just a bizarre outlier, right?
But it also bothers me a little bit, not the film, but like I'm sure maybe you've seen some of this online, but a lot of people are picking on the Eternals right now, and specifically sort of mocking the fact that like, oh, you know, Chloe Zhao is doing you know, her version of a Terrence Malick movie but within the MCU. And I've seen a lot of this stuff with one film personality specifically, and it's kind of weird to me.
I'm assuming I have them muted, but
yes, you do. I
we don't
won't
need
say his
to.
name, but what I'm trying to get at with that is that, one, it's strange that you're picking on, you know, a woman of color who is trying to do something really interesting within the superhero genre and try to kind of break the mold. And then two, it's like you never hear this from that kind of guy when, you know, someone like Joe Carnahan, you know, is clearly mocking or trying to make his version, because The Gray is kind of like a Terrence Malick attempt at doing a survival thriller. There are so many
Sure.
moments that are kind of paying tribute to the kind of meandering, wandering, sort of lyrical melancholy quality of a character going through a significant event, and also connecting with nature and having to defy the odds within sort of a setting that's in the wilderness. And like when it comes to a lot of filmmakers, when it's the male skewer of things doing a Terrence Malick adjacent or like movie, you never hear that criticism. So I just find that is
I think the
interesting.
MCU brings that out too, right? Just the discourse in general is exhausting, and I think just like,
and maybe Nomadland being so successful,
yes,
that it's almost
I
like
think
you
the
got to put her
combo of
down.
those two things, Eric, is what really will bring those people out of the woodwork to just kind of, I just roll my eyes at a lot of that kind of stuff. And either, people are muted already, so I don't see it, or, I just kind of like, and everyone's entitled to their opinion. It's just what people who are just spewing out this.
Oh yeah, and I'll be
like,
critical of Eternals if
rhetoric.
it doesn't work. And like, I understand, like, okay, yeah, Eternals is still being used to sell cars and products and stuff like that. Like, I'm not saying that it's not a product in its own way, but
Guess
it's just
what?
strange.
Movie making is a business.
I know, but it's just strange that, like, out of all the movies that have been inspired by
I
Terrence
agree.
Malick in one way or
Yeah.
another, or other filmmakers that are considered more art house or international based, this is the one that you're sort of making fun of or picking on sight unseen.
Yeah, I don't even give those people an ounce of my thought process or brain power.
But The Gray is great, and
The Gray is great.
is
Cop
a
Shop's
fun
a blast.
little
I
movie.
think once it comes to VOD, if it's not already on, and it's not yet,
No,
right?
not yet.
It
But
should have.
But it is the
probably,
perfect
but,
VOD
like,
movie.
It is. Once it's on VOD for like $6, instantly like rent the movie. It's fun if you like kind of schlocky siege kind of movies, and like with a really fun Toby Huss performance. It's just this assassin.
It's
really,
the best
great.
movie with a lamb this year.
Oh, okay. Can you talk about that yet, or you just want to save that maybe for next week because it
Lamb?
comes out? Yeah.
Well, Lamb's
the
already
review
out.
came out. Yeah. Do you want to touch on that, or do you want to go to Many Saints of Newark, or
so
what?
my review for Lamb is on Rogers TV if you want to see that. But essentially, it is a A24 release that is a high concept, sort of Icelandic folktale, slight tinge of horror fantasy about lamb chops play along, and also introducing Anthony Lamb to the A24 universe.
I wish.
Yeah, it's fine. It's totally fine. It is in terms of the A24 canon, it is
a minor work.
Yeah, but it's fine. I think Adrian Patterson actually put it really well, and I retweeted his tweet. It basically kind of feels like an extended music video, and I was thinking like,
I saw that tweet
in the era of like Daft Punk or Chemical Brothers, or
would have
bands
made
like
a really cool video, but then it's extended to 90 minutes or whatever.
Yeah, because there's that one Daft Punk music video where it's like a dog man walking around the streets, and that's kind of what it felt like to me, but only in Iceland.
Right. Many Saints of Newark we watched. This was an interesting experiment because you are a fan of The Sopranos. You've watched the entire series, right? As Eric goes to grab his probably giant box set of every season. I have not watched any of The Sopranos. I've maybe seen, holy crap, that's a big box. Gabagool. I don't know if that's how you're supposed to use that, but I like the little shimmer on it. Look at that.
Oh,
yeah. Did they put those out in 4K yet, or no?
No, not yet. But when they do,
it is shot on film, so the stuff does look good in HD. But I watched the Many Saints of Newark without having watched. I've seen the pilot episode of The Sopranos
with the Canadian geese in his pool.
Yes. And I've watched that episode maybe 2 or 3 times because I always go, I'm going to start The Sopranos. And then I watch the pilot, and then I never get around to watching anymore. Not that I didn't enjoy it. It's a big investment, and I need to make sure I have the time to, actually get through it and focus on it. So going into this prequel film, directed by Alan Taylor, right?
Who directed many of the episodes of the series. But the guy who I was kind of hoping would direct the movie, in terms of they were bringing on somebody to who directed episodes, was Timothy Van Patten, who I think is one of the better directors in the HBO canon overall. He's done a lot of HBO stuff. Yeah,
so this was just interesting. I went in going, okay, don't know really many of these characters. I know Tony Soprano, obviously, but I'm just going to go into this and go, is this going to be a good gangster movie? That's all that I'm like, let's see. I don't care about the characters. I don't have no attachment to them. This should be interesting. And then Eric will have the other perspective of he's seen The Sopranos, so he has all that context, and does it work for him versus does it work for me? I don't think it worked really for either of us all that much, although you're more mixed positive than
I'm mixed positive in the sense it's like, okay, like it's more of a curiosity, I would say, than anything else for Sopranos fans, but it's also one of those prequel films or series or things where it's like, you didn't really need this.
Yeah.
It like a lot of people will say like, oh, it's something like Solo, right? Where you don't really need to know about like every single
Yeah.
detail about how Han Solo, became Han Solo. It's the same thing
Yeah.
with Tony Soprano. Like Tony Soprano, yeah, there is that curiosity being like, okay, I wonder what it was like for him growing up at, in this particular era of made men,
But then when you find out, you're like, oh, that wasn't all
it's
that
underwhelming
interesting.
overall.
Yeah,
It's
like,
it's the monkey paw kind of thing of like wishing for something, and then when you get it, it's not really what you wanted, or it's sort of a manipulated version of that.
and a
And
different context for me, but Breaking Bad, that sequel movie that they did for Netflix, just like, again,
El Camino,
El
right?
Camino, I'm like, fine. Like, it's interesting to see what Jesse was up to in the moments after that, but like it didn't really add all that much to the series, and that's kind of the vibe that I kind of get from this. And then coming from me who hadn't watched any of the Sopranos, I just think it was a very generic kind of dull gangster movie, and with a lot of bad noses
And makeup
and
and
makeup in
yeah,
general. And like, even me, and I was saying this to you right after, is like, I could tell who was playing a character that was on the show. And
you
I've
mean a
never,
caricature.
yes, and I've never seen any of these people in The Sopranos, maybe in some photos, but like every actor that popped up, and I'm like, I bet you they're playing someone from the show, because it feels like they're doing an impersonation and they have a fake nose. And I'm
Yes.
like,
Well, remember when I said that Billy Magnuson was in it,
I
and
was
you're
like,
like,
didn't even know that was
and
him.
he's playing Polly Walnuts, and you're just
Yeah.
kind of like,
I don't know who that is, but I
yeah,
can tell he's doing a character or a
yeah.
caricature, to your point. And like, that's what I got throughout the whole thing. It's like, everyone's doing a character, and like they're doing an impersonation of the person from the show. So it feels very silly, even as someone who hasn't seen any of the Sopranos. And like, so it kind of, that takes you out of it. And then otherwise it's just kind of a very kind of okay to not so great gangster movie, where I was just mostly bored by the whole thing. And like, I guess maybe if I watched all of the Sopranos, I'd be a little bit more, engaged with it. But as someone who hasn't, I was like, oh my God, I can't wait for this movie to finish. Cause like, I don't get like, it's not even that I need to get any of it. I just like, I don't have an attachment to these characters, and nothing that they're doing is very interesting. There's the whole subplot with Leslie Odom Jr.'s character. That does that have anything to do with the show, or is that
No,
just the plot
no.
of this movie
And
essentially?
I
And
think
then
what they're trying to do is they're also trying to set up a series or another film with that character to
yeah,
continue on and sort of kind of milk a Sopranos universe. And I actually really like Leslie Odom Jr. in
yeah,
the film, and I
I
also
think he's
really
good.
like Alessandro Nivola,
Yeah,
who is this really wonderful character actor that doesn't rarely get lead roles, and he's playing Christopher Montesante's father, and sort of Tony Soprano's kind of sort of major influence on his life, and sort of a father figure, because his real father, played by John Bernthal, wasn't really in the picture all that much. And then Vera Farmiga, who's playing the patriarch, is very much again a caricature with the prosthetics and makeup and things like that, and is kind of mimicking the performance from the show. And it's just strange because you do have these performances from actors who are playing characters that might have been mentioned on the show but were never on the show before in any kind of physical representation. So that gives the actor a little bit more freedom and license to kind of create their own performance and sort
I'm
of
assuming like
build
Ray Liotta and like,
Ray,
yeah,
yeah, where you have someone like Corey Stoll who's playing Uncle Junior, and like with him, like he's so thin-skinned and sensitive and takes everything so personally, that like when they set this kind of up in the third act and sort of who he is as a personality, it's like again you're getting a caricature and not a performance. And like it kind of feels like you have to play them as though they were on the show, and that they weren't somebody like the person that was played on the show isn't necessarily the same person that they were 20, 30, 40 years ago, right? Like you
yeah.
change over time.
But
The
this,
older
they're
you,
saying it is the same
yeah,
exact thing,
down
right?
even
Yeah,
to like the mannerisms of how people sort of act, and it is very jarring. And then also I felt like visually speaking, the kind of slick, kind of cool look doesn't really lend itself to what the show was, which again, the show wasn't very stylized in any way, but you kind of feel like it's not of the same world. Like it kind of just feels like a gangster movie with characters that have the same names. And
Yeah.
and Michael Gandolfini, I think he is really trying and doing the best he can, but he's okay at the best. And I hate saying that
Very much
because
a supporting character too. Like I
yeah,
don't necessarily think the movie's
yeah,
about
so
Tony
his
Soprano.
well, I mean, I that makes sense
Yeah.
because Tony Soprano was only a kid,
Yeah, he
in his
wasn't really
a
part of the
child when he
business that
begins, and
much.
then
Yeah.
when he's in his early 20s, when or late teens, early 20s, when he's introduced as Michael Gandolfini playing Tony Soprano. But one, you're playing like James Gandolfini's performance on The Sopranos as Tony Soprano is one of the great television performances. Like it is a second skin that he slipped into and sort of created this iconic personality who was so cruel and misogynistic and violent and volatile, but at the same time he was weirdly charming and likable and had the kind of personality of a big kid. And so he was a very complex personality that you felt that James Gandolfini was able to sort of create over the course of the series, but even knew how to play the character even going into it, because for the most of his career leading up to The Sopranos, he was always typecast as kind of the heavy in gangster movies or thrillers. I mean, the most notable film that a lot of people kind of remember him from beforehand was Tony Scott's True Romance, where he has that terrifying, horrifying scene with Patricia Arquette, where he is just
Oh
almost
right.
kills her, right? Like
Yeah.
that is like when he's talking to Brad Pitt stoner in that one scene, he has this menacing kind of quality, but he's also really likable in another Tony Scott movie with Crimson Tide. So that series for the remainder of his life really changed the trajectory of his career, going from always reliable character actor to this larger than life personality that was kind of defined by the character, even though he could also play very sweet and likable characters, like in his last kind of big supporting role in Nicole Holofcener's Enough Said with Julia Louis-Dreyfus, and even again sort of adding texture to The Drop with Tom Hardy, which is a really underrated little movie.
Yeah. Yeah, didn't do anything for
But I
me,
I agree.
but
It like
yeah.
to me, it's like I was curious about it, just having seen the show and seeing like what it would add to it. But overall, having watched it, I was kind of like, yeah, I didn't really need this. Like, it didn't really do anything to add to the mythology or the lore of what was already there, and it just kind of felt like David Chase going back to the well.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree with that. Let's move on. Do you have anything else that
I've
you
got a
want
lot of stuff, but you can just
but
go onto my Letterbox account. I've
yeah,
been watching a
fair.
lot of Shudder stuff, but I will
Right.
say this: Psycho Gorman is a pleasant surprise.
Okay, cool. I want to watch it. I
It's
just
a
haven't yet.
very tonally awkward, kind of disjointed sort of attempt at doing it's basically Guar Wars, which I want
Yeah.
to trademark it, but it is a very fun movie. If you liked Manborg or The Editor, actually one of the actors
Right.
from The Editor
The editor's great, yeah.
plays this kind of lazy deadbeat dad who's a lot of fun, but it is so goofy and over the top and such a B movie, but it's really enjoyable. And Peter Kaplowski, it was a co-producer on the film. We had him on our Untitled Movie
Over a year ago
Conversations
now,
over a
yeah.
year ago. Yeah, so it's a very
Which
fun
we
little movie.
touched on it then, but yeah,
Yeah.
cool. That's good to hear. I want to see that. Okay, moving on to some trailer talk. We missed out on Licorice Pizza last week, right after we finished recording 2 weeks ago. So we'll start there, Eric, and then we'll go through. We got lots of trailers. We already talked about the Scream trailer, so we don't need to cover that. But we'll talk about Licorice Pizza. I think we can talk about Red Rocket, as well as Paranormal Activity, Next of Kin, and Resident Evil, Welcome to Raccoon City. I'll touch on the Dune final trailer. You guys can check out our review of that, but I have some thoughts on that I think. Actually, I won't talk about that because it goes into spoiler stuff of the movie, so we'll skip over that. But let's
But
start with
essentially, maybe you want to skip the final trailer for Dune if you don't
yes.
want to have the film spoiled.
I will say that, I think, like, and even for guys who, we didn't love the movie, you can check out our review if you want our full thoughts on that, and don't be angry at us. But
Remember, it's an opinion.
it's
People are
really
allowed to have them.
that final trailer, like, I get it. They're really trying to sell the shit out of this movie, but like that final trailer, I watched it and I was like, they give away everything. And I hope like people don't watch this thing. Like,
But
I
chances are that people won't, because if it's an
yeah.
online thing specifically, like, yeah, you'll get people that watch it that are always on social media and things like
Sure,
that.
but
But
if they're
chances are
playing
they've
that in
already seen it.
theaters, like, I don't know
But
if they
will they
are,
though?
but I don't
Because I
know.
don't know if that's going to be a theater trailer, especially with it so soon
I
coming
hope
out
not,
now.
but it does give away a lot. But first we'll go into Paul Thomas Anderson's Licorice Pizza, formerly known as Soggy Bottom.
I keep
Uh
on wanting to call it Licorice Whip.
Crack that whip. It reminds me of The Simpsons with
Well, it's the Devo
Smithers.
song, right?
Yeah, I know, but it reminds me of Smithers
Yeah.
in The Simpsons. What you think of Licorice Pizza, the trailer?
I'm excited for it. I mean, I'm always down for a new PTA film, and it'll be fascinating to see him kind of going back to his maybe comfort zone in a way, and sort of telling a story in San Bernardino, and doing a period piece that's in the same decade as Boogie Nights, and doing something that is a coming of age story. And we talked about Michael Gandolfini,
Yep,
filling in for his
his
late
father.
father. And now you have Cooper Hoffman, the son of the late great Philip Seymour Hoffman, as one of the leads, which I think is really interesting. And it's his first film, and it's an ensemble piece. But I was kind of surprised with that. It's not necessarily, like a lot of what we've seen so far in terms of, like, production stills and stuff like that has been on Bradley Cooper playing basically John Peters, the producer of A Star Is Born, which is just funny because it comes full circle, and thinking, like, he directed, produced, star, and co-wrote a version of A Star Is Born, and now he's playing the producer of the Barbra Streisand version of A Star Is Born. Is also known for being the guy who wanted Kevin Smith to write in a giant spider in the Superman Nicolas Cage movie that never happened. That also, that
God, I
giant
wish
spider,
we got that.
that giant spider also ended up being in Wild Wild West, which Will Smith has
Right.
recently said is the worst movie he's ever made. So John Peters
I
is a
don't
very
disagree.
strange personality and a very larger than life figure as well. Um, the title itself is kind of interesting in that it refers to this kind of like Sam the Record Man esque record store in
Oh
LA,
yeah.
and
Okay.
it's also a record store that appears in Fast Times at Richmond High, which Sean Penn is the lead, or one of the leads on in that, and is also in this
In this,
movie.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm in. I'm always down for a new PTA. I think the thing I'm looking forward to most, like, not many people shoot on film anymore, and he's one of the guys who still does. And even this trailer, watching it in really high quality. I started to do this super nerdy thing, Eric. When we get those EPK press releases saying a new trailer's out, I go and download like the ProRes version, like the highest quality version, instead of just watching this stuff compressed on YouTube and stuff like that. So like, and I'll actually go and crop it into the proper aspect ratio and watch it on my widescreen monitor and stuff, and it just looks so much better. That being said, the texture, and just, you can tell this is shot on film and it matches the period of the film, and it's just like, that's the stuff I kind of miss. And I'm not one of those guys that is like, I try not to be, pretentious when it comes to that kind of stuff, but I still really love to see it. Like, I'm one who's totally fine with digital projection and digital cinematography, and I'm open to, the industry adapting and changing with the times. But it is still wonderful when you see something that is clearly shot on film, and it has that texture and just the flesh tones and that grain that's on it. Just, it looks fantastic. And I think that's what excites me the most. And I know he's one of those guys that, whether he releases this on 35 millimeter film or 70 millimeter film, probably 35, because I know it played at some like art house theaters on 35 millimeter film, the trailer, before it even premiered online.
Yeah, the New
So
Beverly and Draft House cinemas and
so I
some
wouldn't be
rec
surprised,
theaters.
if this plays Lightbox or a couple other, places that still play stuff on 35 millimeter, right? Like, as well as, in your digital, Cineplexes and whatever. But I think that's what excites me the most. And it's like, we joke about, like, we'll watch some, schlocky movie from the 90s or something that's just like bottom of the barrel, just garbage movie. And you're like, even back then, like, it's shot on film. Like, this garbage movie is shot on film, and you kind of miss that. So when you see, like, even prestige stuff like this, like, um I went onto the Kodak website right after watching this trailer, and they have a good list of, like, upcoming movies and movies that were recently shot on film, like a complete list, at least Kodak film, which most people use. And I know, Nolan invested in Kodak and a few other
Which
filmmakers
he
to keep
probably will
them,
be again with Oppenheimer now
yeah,
going into
to
production
keep
later
them
this year.
afloat. I think a bunch of filmmakers kind of got together and made sure that, people could still access film stock. And so on the Kodak website, you can kind of see what movies were shot on film recently. Blue Bayou, which, Eric, I know you saw, and some other more recent stuff was shot on film too. So it's just that's what excites me most
Well, Red
about Licorice.
Rocket's also shot
Red
on
Rocket,
film.
yeah. So anytime I see that shot on film kind of thing, like, it intrigues me. Even if the movie is going to be good or bad, that doesn't really matter. I'm just like, I like seeing that. So I hope we're able to see it projected on film, but if not, it'll still look good digitally. So yeah, I'm excited for it. I mean, a new PTA is a new PTA. I'll always be kind of intrigued by it.
Yeah, he
um
basically writes his own ticket. He's one of
yeah.
those filmmakers that is still able to entice a wide enough audience based on his name just alone.
Yeah, I think he's not maybe as, like, he's obviously very well known, but I think it's a specific audience that is in that boat that we're in, where, like, we'll check out a PTA movie no matter what. Like,
Right. But if you say, like,
um
from the director of Boogie Nights or There Will Be
yeah,
Blood
sure.
or something
Fair.
like that, like, people will kind of know those movies,
Yeah, and
like,
then yeah, go ahead, sorry.
oh, no, I was just going to say that, like, those,
I just said good transition when you brought up Red Rocket. Like, we also got the first trailer for Red Rocket. We talked about Scary Movie a little bit earlier when we were talking about
Thespian
Scream.
Simon Rex.
Yeah. So, Sean Baker, he's shown me that I will, again, another filmmaker that I will be intrigued by whatever his next project is. Loved Florida Project, loved Tangerine. So I'm very much looking forward to Simon Rex for a good, which I never thought I'd say out loud. But as a former adult film star, and I loved this trailer as well, going back to the look of it, and just very intrigued by his, showcasing different cultures in the US, in that aren't really represented a lot, I guess, is
Well, you're
like a,
talking
like,
specifically Texas, sort of
yeah,
Republican red state, which I think one of the most interesting things he was talking about it actually
or even in
recently
Florida
on.
Project and Tangerine as well, like, just
Yeah,
the,
yeah,
yeah,
those that lived on the fringes of society
yeah,
that are barely sort of, depicted on screen, and many of them being characters in themselves and kind of using a hybrid of both actors and non-professional actors in sort
yeah,
of basically interacting in scenes. I think one of the most interesting things about this, having not watched it yet, but kind of just hearing an interview with him talking about it, is that he wanted to make sure that there was no reference of COVID. So he said it in 2015.
I
So he
love that.
wanted, yeah, so he wanted to make sure that it was,
Period accurate, so he
yeah,
didn't have it set in 2020, but there was no COVID or whatever.
yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. No, I'm looking forward to it. And I even love nerdy, some things that people will roll their eyes at, but, like, all his movies have the same font and stuff, like, in the credits, and it has that handwriting kind of, opening credits in both Tangerine and Florida Project, and just those kind of little auteur kind of, like, quirks and stuff, like style choices. I always kind of, like, appreciate, of, like, the consistency of being like, this is my movie, I'm gonna have a consistent, like, vibe and look to it. That stuff always kind of, I love, and those stylistic choices. So I loved seeing that in
And
this
the movie
trailer
almost
too.
didn't happen. Like, it wasn't, he wasn't working on that film at the like he after the Florida project he was living and working in Vancouver and was going to shoot something else, and then COVID happened, and then he basically decided to make Red Rocket instead, and like um Simon Rex was the actor he wanted, and he didn't go through like an agent or anything. Like apparently he
Didn't he
called
just
Simon.
like message him and say like send me a tape of like you doing these lines or something?
Yeah, and Simon Rex at the time was at the Joshua Tree, just like doing drugs, and
Yeah.
it was like, yeah,
Uh,
okay,
yeah, because he is a former, didn't he do like he did like
solo
solo
adult film
masturbation
star,
scenes? Yeah,
yes,
yeah, yeah.
and
So
Scary Movie 4 and
alum.
5 alum, yeah.
I'm looking forward to it. And then a couple horror trailers dropped. We got the Paranormal Activity reboot that's coming to Paramount Plus called Next of Kin, or is it a legacy sequel? I'm not entirely sure. I think
Well,
what was
Christopher Landon's back, right? Or those guys that kind of worked on Freaky and Happy Death Day.
yeah, oh, is that who's yeah, and they worked on some of the other ones,
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
they worked on the
So
later ones.
I wasn't sure if this is part of the same universe, if it's a reboot. I couldn't grasp it uh from the trailer, but what caught me off guard, I guess, is that it's not it looks like it's sort of uh
Found
a
footage.
found footage, but sort of not. Like that's what was confusing to me. And like it's just it's shot in a way where I'm like, oh, this isn't like, a found footage movie, but then part of it seems like it is.
Yeah, I mean, with the last, it's I can barely remember the last few other than the
I didn't see
spin-off in
marked
Mexico.
ones.
That one
Yeah.
is ridiculous because there's a sequence where like these possessed older women are being blown away by shotguns,
Yeah.
and you're just like, wow, this series does not care anymore. And the marked ones was supposed to kind of be the beginning of a spin-off of that original series and sort of creating a greater occult and world within sort of the character. I think that the villain or the ghost was named Toby or something in the later ones, where like it was kind of becoming the boogeyman of the Paranormal Activity universe instead of Katie, who was kind of the
Right.
recurring
For
kind
the
of
first like
possessed
4
villain.
or 5 or whatever.
Yeah, and I don't know, I mean, they are what they are. They're disposable Friday night fright flicks that will, do what they say on the box, and then, you move on with life, and then, they kind of all blur together. The only one I really remember that well is part 3 because it took
In
place
the
in the
80s, yeah.
80s.
I
It
think
has a
part 3 is
Teddy
my
Rock
favorite
spin.
one, yeah. Part 3 is my favorite one because of the period element, and it has that great fan sequence, I
Yeah,
think that is really effective, and,
which obviously Alfonso Cuarón ripped off in Roma.
yeah, exactly. Um, and I love the vibe of that movie taking place in the 80s. I really do, think the 3rd one is the best movie. The first one, I think,
The first one was groundbreaking in the
yeah,
way that
it's
it
release
was,
and, like,
yeah,
it's
like the
yeah.
idea of like, people sort of basically petitioning for it to come to their cities and kind of being
'Cause it was a Sundance hit, right? And
yeah,
then,
a
like,
road show rollout, right? Like, because like the first place in Toronto it played at was at Yonge and Dundas, and it took weeks later because it was kind of a
I
grassroots kind
remember
of like,
Oshawa got one of those screenings, I remember, like,
yeah,
and, like, I'm sure it was just a big marketing thing where they looked at the major cinemas in most of these towns and then just did that roadshow style thing that you're talking about, but then you get people to vote for it and spread word of mouth and stuff like that. But I remember going to that Oshawa screening, at the cinema I worked at, and it was one of those vote for it to come to your town, and if it gets enough votes, it'll come for one night only or whatever. And I remember just everyone thinking that movie was truly terrifying. And
it's kind of boring.
um, I
Just because
like the
it's so
first
it's
one, but
so static in terms of
I think
like
it's
it's like
effective though in its filmmaking because of that. Like, and I felt like it was creepy because of that, with its security cam kind of video cam kind of footage. So I will disagree with you there where
but when was the last time you watched it?
oh, it's been a while. I mean,
Yeah.
like when I first watched it, like
Well,
now
watch
I'm
it
like,
now. Like I would, because I remember watching it and thinking like, okay, I get the point. The first night there's a sound. Second night there's another sound followed by a door slowly creaking
I don't know
open.
if it works anymore. I agree with you there. But I think at the time it really did work, and you can tell why they were so cheap to make, and they made a
Right.
million
Well,
of
it was
them.
the
And
beginning
like,
of Blumhouse too,
yeah,
right? Like Blumhouse kind of, that was their first kind of big success. That and then the Purge movies were the ones that kind of established them as kind of the new kind of B movie titans that would spend 5, 10, 15 million dollars on
and they make
smaller
hundreds of
budgeted.
millions. Yeah,
Yeah, but then also they kind of were like one and done successes for a lot of their filmmakers, including Oren Pele, who directed Paranormal Activity, the first one, and was kind of the godfather of the series, because he tried to do the same thing with Area 51, or that Area 51 movie, which got
yeah,
delayed for the longest time and then eventually ended up on
just got dumped.
Netflix.
Yeah,
Yeah, and it's
yeah,
terrible. I mean, it's the same film basically, but it's just kind of like what you'd expect an alien sort of found footage movie to be. It just, lightning doesn't always strike twice, and in the
yeah.
case of that guy's career, it did not. It's the same thing with the Blair Witch guys. Like they had this huge sort of phenomenon with that movie, and it's still, I think Blair Witch is more effective even now than Paranormal Activity. But after Blair Witch, those guys, like, they pitched a bunch of stuff, but they were never able to get anything
Never worked.
made.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think Blair Witch holds up more than Paranormal Activity. And like, I was also shocked watching that trailer. I'm like, oh, this comes out in 2 weeks. I'm
Well,
like,
it's on Paramount Plus,
yeah,
right? Like it's one of,
sure.
like, Clifford the Big Red Dog and Paranormal
Yeah.
Activity Next of Kin, or whatever it's called, are now Paramount Plus movies
So do you think, is
in
it
the
getting a
US.
theatrical release here, I'm assuming, or
Probably what will
VOD?
happen
Like,
is that it'll either be VOD day and date, or it will randomly, mysteriously pop up on Amazon Prime in the
right.
next
Oh,
six
yeah. Cause
months.
yeah, that's true. Quiet Place did that. Right.
Yeah.
So,
So one or the
um,
two.
yeah, I mean, I'll check it out when it drops on VOD. I don't know if I'm gonna rush out to a cinema to go see it, but I'm morbidly curious, I guess. And then speaking of morbidly curious, we got the
I can't
trailer
believe, though, we
for
got a new Saw movie and a new Paranormal Activity film in the same
feels like
year.
2006.
Oh yeah,
Like,
we're back, baby.
um, uh, we got a trailer. Also, speaking of the mid 2000s, we got a trailer for Resident Evil.
God.
Welcome to Raccoon City, um, which is a reboot of the Resident Evil movie franchise.
But going back to the
The
game,
original
right?
2 games, it looks like, for
Yeah.
the most part. So, like, what I will say is I don't think it looks very good at all. It does very much look like
How
a
dare you
cheap.
insult Johann Roberts, the director of 47 Meters Down and Strangers Pray at Night?
Yeah,
How dare you, sir?
it does look very cheap, which means it does look like a Resident Evil movie. What I do like is that it does seem a little bit more faithful to those first 2 games. You see the mansion, you see the Raccoon City Police Department, which are the 2 settings of those first 2 games in the series. You see a lot of characters from the games that seem more faithful than the versions we got in the movies that were introduced later. Um, so there is some stuff there, if you're a fan of the
Can I
Resident
add
Evil.
something to that, to the
Yeah,
positive
please.
side?
Yeah.
Not directed by Paul W.S. Anderson
Yes.
or Yui Bull.
Yeah, I agree with that. Um,
Already a
so
plus.
so there's a compliment to Johann
Roberts.
Roberts. Anyway, if you're a fan of the games, I feel like there is going to be some stuff in here that is going to be intriguing. I don't know if you go, yes, this is the Resident Evil movie I've always wanted. Um, I think it could be silly, ridiculous fun. If you include some of the ridiculous puzzle elements that are in the Resident Evil games that make no sense, that are like puzzles in this house that unlock different areas, and in this police station that was built over this like thing that had like, you know, if they include some of that stuff from the games, I'll be really fascinated to see how that works in a movie.
And if they
Um,
include, because Johann Roberts, one thing that he's done with the films that he has made so far is he's included sort of like goofy, sort of the time, or in the case of 47 Meters Down, like weird music choices, and so it's
Yeah, and
taking
same
place in
at
90.
Strangers Pray at Night. He did that
Yeah,
too,
which
right?
was like a whole 80s soundtrack. And even though I didn't love that movie, there is one sequence that's actually really, really good, which is a pool sequence with Lewis Pullman being attacked by one of the strangers, and Total Eclipse of the Heart plays as he's being dragged underwater. But then when he's underwater, you
The
only kind
sound.
of, yeah.
Yeah.
And so there are clever things like that. Or even in the sequel to 47 Meters Down, they played Roxette's The Look at one time. He didn't direct that one, but he was a producer and executive on that. And so it takes place in 98. So even with the trailer playing Four Non-Blondes, What's
Oh,
Going On,
that is a weird music choice even for
right?
this.
but
Yeah.
but but given that it's 98, I would assume that we'll probably get some choice cuts when it comes to the soundtrack.
And I do like that they're setting it in the late 90s, right? Because that's when the game came out. And like,
And
I
also
do like
98's
that.
now a
And
period, right? It's a period piece.
God, that, yes, we can talk about that 90s show as well. But like, yeah, I don't know. It doesn't look good. But as a video game fan, do I think this is going to be the one that, this is going to be the one? Absolutely not.
This is probably
Um,
going to be the best Resident Evil movie.
but that's not a high
High
bar at
bar.
all.
No, not at
No,
all.
like it needs to be a 4 out of 10 or a 2 out of 5 to be
Or
the
just a
best.
2.5.
Yeah, to be the best Resident Evil movies. So,
I wanna be the very
yeah, if it's
best.
a 2.5 out of 5, this thing is leaps and bounds the best Resident Evil movies. So, like,
Yeah.
that's really not a high bar. So, am I looking forward to it because of that? I'm not saying looking forward to it, but like,
I think the greatest sort of aspiration for this film, or what you could hope for, is that it's going to be trashy fun.
and that's what I hope. And I hope that's what we get. Its worst crime will be if it's just boring.
Yeah.
And I
Which
hope
it could
it's
very
not.
well be. I
So,
think the
yeah,
special
no.
effects in terms of like the monsters
Look
does look,
awful.
yeah.
It looks awful.
Like it
Just
almost looks like something like a Snapchat like effect
I'm
that you would
like,
get for Halloween.
yes, that's perfect. Like those augmented reality bullshit things. Like I'm like, or maybe it's a commentary. Like, is it supposed to be 1998 also with your CG or
Well, I'm sure they
um
weren't thinking like that when they were making it, but I'm sure there'll be an Armin White who enjoys it quite a bit and says that it is. So
is he a vulgar auteur? Has he got there yet? Johann Roberts?
yeah,
Is
I would
he?
say he falls
Yeah.
in that category. Although
Yeah.
he's not maybe as praised as Paul W.S. Anderson by certain academic types, or a Yom Colette Sarah. But yeah, he would fall into that category kind of perfectly.
Okay, cool. And that's wrapping up the trailers that have come out the last couple of weeks. Let's move on to the news as I take a note. I think, Eric, the biggest piece of news, speaking of MCU, we talked about Eternals a little bit. We got news that the Eternals is 2 hours and 40 minutes, so there's that.
Is that the
uh
longest Marvel movie?
no, because Endgame is 3 hours and 1
Right.
minute.
Keep forgetting that.
But I would say it's the second longest, or Infinity War was also around
I
2
mean, should you
hours
just
and
include Infinity War and Endgame together and just be like, that's like
five
a
and a half
5 half?
hours.
Yeah.
Infinity War runtime is 2 hours 29 minutes, so this is longer than that. So this would be the second longest Marvel movie at almost 2 hours and 40 minutes, next to Endgame, which, I mean, I'm all for, because like, one, Chloe Zhao, I'm like, again, after Nomadland and her last like, just
The writer and
she's the best. And like, I'm all for her doing her Marvel epic. And like, but you don't, like, we've come accustomed to 2 hours 20 minutes is usually 2 hours
well,
15
comic book
minutes.
movies
Like,
in general,
yeah,
right? Like, I mean, with the exception of Venom, Let There Be Carnage being, a cool 93, 94 minutes, which was not
which is
great, but
actually a bad thing for that movie.
but yeah, comic book movies in general, the running time is at least 2 hours.
Yes,
I
but
think I
they're
would be
usually 2 to 220, right?
I
But
think I would be a little bit more suspect if the next Ant-Man movie was as
was
long as
yeah,
Eternals, or an Avengers film, because I feel like that doesn't really require the length of it. And with Eternals, it's interesting. Like, I don't really know that much about Eternals, even though I
same.
do have a limited comic book knowledge. But I was listening to a podcast, The Flophouse, recently, and they did kind of talk about Eternals when the first trailer hit, and they were saying that like Elliot Kalin specifically, who's one of the co-hosts, was talking about like Eternals is just one of those properties that nobody cares about whatsoever, and so you can basically do whatever you want with it. But I guess what we're getting to, like, is the Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 casting news of Adam Warlock being played by Will Poulter.
Yes, I think that's the biggest piece of news. And what I forgot we didn't talk about was the Home Sweet Home Alone trailer, Eric.
I didn't even watch that.
Okay. It looks awful. But I mean,
will we review it?
Oh yeah, we will. Because
Okay.
come on,
well, Buzz is in it. Dustin
yes,
Rattray.
he's a cop. Of course, Buzz is a cop.
Well, that makes perfect sense. Buzz, your girlfriend. Woof.
It looks terrible. Just to quickly touch on it, but also the Home Alone movies aren't great. So like, it looks like
the first one's a classic.
I think it's a classic. I don't get. I love
Uncle Frank is the true villain.
But they're very much kids movies, right?
Yeah.
And I think our nostalgia
we grew up
is
with
what,
those films.
Yes, and I feel like this looks like a modern version of those movies. And like, I could see as an adult, if we were adults when Home Alone came out, I'm pretty sure
we're grown 30-something-year-old men watching a kids movie.
Yeah, so you kind of have to have that lens.
8-year-olds.
Yeah, you have to have that lens on it, right?
Yeah.
So like,
it's like Paw Patrol, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Anyways, moving to the news. Yeah. Will Poulter has been cast as Adam Warlock in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. James Gunn did confirm this on Twitter, because he says usually I don't speculate on rumors and things. He's like,
well, he usually debunks them as soon as somebody kind of brings up something that's kind of spreading.
So he will just say, no, that's bullshit, it's not true. But
and this was also through Deadline, which is usually reputable when it comes to movie news.
Yeah. So he beat out a couple other people. He beat out
George
McKay, who just saw Wolf. So maybe he just sent in that movie and was like, "Look what I can do." And
like Stewie, look what I can do.
Renee Jean, what's his name from Bridgerton? Renee Jean Page or something, I forget.
Yeah.
But Will Poulter beats them out, and he is playing Adam Warlock, who we were teased at the end of Guardians Volume 2.
Seems so long ago.
Right? Doesn't that movie feel like ages ago? I like Will Poulter enough.
He's fine. I think he's best when he's playing an asshole like he did in Midsommar.
So maybe that's who Adam Warlock is. Again, another character that I'm not super familiar with.
Well, he is associated with the Infinity Stones, right? And so maybe it's going to be a situation like Ultron, where like Ultron was the creation of Ant-Man, of Hank Pym, but since they kind of rewrote it and made it Tony's creation, because Ant-Man wasn't really introduced in the MCU as of yet, like, I wonder what Adam Warlock's sort of narrative arc will be, not only in Guardians 3, but maybe what he'll mean within the rest of the MCU moving forward, because you got to think that Adam Warlock is a pretty important character within the MCU.
Yeah, the cosmic side of things, I think, and
especially with Eternals coming out, and
Captain Marvel even moving forward. So I have no idea. I mean, I have all the faith in James Gunn, and after Suicide Squad and the first 2 Guardians movies, and I'm curious to see that cast in Thor: Love and Thunder, which I know Gunn kind of didn't work on, but he helped Taika Waititi on that as well.
He'll be credited as like an executive producer or consultant.
Yeah. So both Guardians movies are great. So I like Will Poulter. I don't know much about Adam Warlock, but then I didn't know much about the Guardians. So I just know that he was heavily involved in the Infinity Gauntlet storyline, and I think he wields the Infinity Stones at one point, like the Gauntlet, but starts as a villain, but maybe becomes more of a hero, but I'm not entirely sure. But I'm intrigued nonetheless. I know they said it was a role that many young actors in Hollywood were trying to get. So good on him. Good on you, Will Poulter.
Star of Midsommar.
He's also good in the Black Mirror Choose Your Own Adventure thing. I like.
Bandersnatch.
Yeah, but again, playing kind of an asshole, to your point.
Yeah.
What else dropped in the last kind of week or so, Eric? Or 2
well,
weeks?
the Christopher Nolan news that Oppenheimer is shooting either later this year or early next year that Cillian Murphy will be playing the titular Oppenheimer, and that it seems like it's going to be it has a release date too, right, of July 2023.
Yep,
I believe. Yeah.
you're
So
correct.
I think that was kind of like a big kind of news story. But a news story that I wanted to actually talk to you about was Neon's announcement of the release strategy for Memoria being a film that will roll out in one theater.
Couple big pieces of Neon news this week too, but yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I guess we could also mention quickly that T10 has been selected by France as their international selection.
And they picked up Pleasure as well.
Yes.
But Memoria, yeah, sorry.
Yeah. So quickly though, with Pleasure, that was really interesting because A24 was going to release the film, and then all of a sudden it disappeared from their website.
You had the scoop on this. You were the first person I saw that.
Well, I'm obsessive compulsive with release dates. When it's like, okay, is this film coming out? Am I putting it on my list of films that I've seen this year?
Because you were the first person I saw that tweeted out being like, what's going on with the release of Pleasure? Because I don't see it anywhere on A24's website.
But essentially, as the press release kind of noted, it wasn't specific, but they're going to release the version we saw on Sundance's digital platform, which is the uncut version. How they're going to do that is I don't know. Like, I don't know what their plans are, but it'll probably have to be unrated, meaning that it goes past the MPAA and that it's only going to be played in rep theaters and art house cinemas and things like that. And I mean, that's fine. I mean, it wasn't going to be a multiplex
it's
film.
What you wanted, right?
Neither was Memoria, though. So,
well, yeah, it's what she wanted, right? Because I think the big, butting heads with A24 is they wanted to release both an R-rated version and an unrated version, and
which I don't know how you could pull off an R-rated version. You know, like it seems
like it
cut out
all the nudity mostly,
but then half of the film is gone. Like I think,
or you have to like
and some of the points,
stuff and like it's. Like, because it's the, not to be too graphic, but it's like when you show like an erection in like a movie and like there's penetrative sex in the movie, like I guess you could have cut that stuff out when they're weirdly sexist that, you can show female nudity for the most part, but if
you can get away with like somebody having their head bashed
and you just have Michael Myers stomping on a dude's face and
that's cool,
crushing like a watermelon, but
that gets an R rating, but anything to do with sex is NC-17.
It's so weird, right? So I'm sure like you don't want a watered down version of that movie because I feel like that kind of
defeats the purpose of what the film is trying to say and show. Portray.
So I totally understand why she was like, no, I want this to be the uncut version. And then it seemed like A24 was hesitant with that. So then Neon was like, fine, we'll do it. And then she luckily A24, I don't know what how they would have done that, but
this happens a lot with A24 where it's like, yeah, they do release a lot of great stuff, but
they pick up a lot of stuff and then just either dump it or
for a studio that's kind of been championing indie films, you kind of get this sense it's like, as long as the indie film is from a big enough filmmaker or is critically acclaimed enough, they'll always be on your side.
Yeah.
But if you're under the Silver Lake and you play at Cannes and get a bad reception, good luck.
Bury you.
We won't even
give
you
it's a good movie, and it makes me so mad that like that got
it didn't
buried.
deserve that. A24 did that movie dirty, and it kind of almost feels similar without maybe knowing all the behind the scenes stuff, but like, again, A24 presenting itself as a cutting edge indie company about, the filmmakers being first, with Under the Silver Lake and with this, it kind of goes against that. And not saying that Neon's perfect either. It's just interesting that, like, even with the Memoria stuff, I think Neon is going maybe a little too far with that.
Okay, let's get into that.
So a pitch upon we were Seth Cool's Memoria, which is a film we reviewed at TIFF.
Check out our review.
Yeah. I think we both liked to love the film, and it's a movie that the more I think about, the more I really like.
Same.
It's a movie that is very much surreal and dreamlike, but Neon announced that their rollout of the movie is going to be one theater in every town indefinitely.
It will only play in one theater at a time in
Yeah.
like a rolling roadshow for the rest of history. They said, I think,
Which already doesn't make any sense because
and it will never come to streaming or physical
that does
media.
nope.
Oh, I thought
That's
that's
our
what they said.
nope
They debunked that
because
already.
no. For North America maybe, but Mubi picked it up in the UK and other parts of the world,
Right.
and it
Okay.
is going to be a streamer.
Right. So you're
Already
kind of like,
defeats the purpose
but
of
then
that.
will it only be available in Europe on Mubi, or will it like, or
Yeah,
will it?
yeah, like
Yeah.
it's only, but again, that
No, that
still
means you could still
defeats the
get it if you
purpose.
really want to. Yeah.
Exactly. So like they've already and I think like this is weirdly the thing that is just most expected of a pitch a pong, where like I think it would have been weirder if it was a film that he put in traditional multiplexes. I think
Oh
that would
yeah.
have been the weirder kind of expect the unexpected of a filmmaker like that. And it's also Columbia's entry for the international Oscar submission. So yeah, I feel that like
I see what you're saying with the movie thing of it defeating the purpose of the release strategy, right? Like, because if
yeah,
you really truly did a worldwide, it is only playing in one location at a time for a week at a time, and that's the only way you can see this movie, is interesting as like an art piece, right? Because like I even like the idea that it's maybe even playing a art gallery or a museum or something, because a
sure.
lot of the times they have either a screening room or something like that, where, or even the Museum of the Moving Image in New York, which I want to go
MoMA
with
or
you.
even
I want to go
AGO
with you to
or
that one time, Eric, because
yeah.
next time we go to New York together, because like Momi was it was so cool. It's in Queens and it's awesome. So like I could see something where it's playing at like art galleries, or they build like a small cinema in an art gallery and you go see it there. Like I think that's kind of cool, but I agree with you that it being on streaming on Mubi internationally, like, then it kind of is defeating the purpose. So you're really just saying in North America, the only way you're going to be able to see
And
it is
even
at
then
this,
we
like,
don't know if Elevation is going to
do that as well
do
here
that,
in
because
Canada.
Elevation Pictures Canada has the rights to the film here, and I don't know, like I don't think in the contract that they it would be a question.
Originally signed.
Yeah, I should ask some of the people there and see if they know what's going on with that, because yeah, it
It could
doesn't
be
seem like they have to
interesting.
follow that
I don't think they do,
route.
because they signed
No.
that before Neon picked up Memoria, right?
Yeah.
Like, so I yeah, I could see it being a US only thing. That's what they're doing, as a gimmicky kind of thing in the US, but
This it would have worked. It would have worked if it was the 1980s or the 1990s, in a pre-internet era.
mhm.
But since
Where
the
there's
film
one
has
film
sold
print, they only print one film print and
exactly,
it
but
goes
since the
around.
film has sold to not there's also other streaming services that it sold in parts of Asia and in other parts of the world. So it's not just movie, but it will be available on these other streaming platforms internationally. So it's like I think Netflix actually has it in parts of
Oh yeah.
like Latin America. And so like it's just
If you liked Squid Game,
yeah. But
here's
it just
some other
is
international
it's
cinema.
like
Watch
okay, I would
Memoria.
get that working in the 1980s, 1970s, like in the before times, not pandemic before times, but
Technology, internet.
yeah. But
Yeah.
it doesn't work now. That does not work. And it actually hurts the film
I
because
think it could if that was literally if you made
only
one
way,
deal, worldwide rights,
but they
like,
didn't.
but they didn't. So I agree with you that it doesn't necessarily work because you already, bastardized it by, making, and I get why you make these other deals. You need to make your money back and things like that. And it's not as easy as selling worldwide rights to something, because that's actually very hard to do, is just sell, to one. Even look at Bond being, international rights are owned by Universal. Here it's United Artists. I thought it was going to be Annapurna at one point, but it never ended up doing that
And
because
then before then it was
yeah.
Sony.
Yeah. So like every movie, like and even I've told this story before, but working at Show Me, like at a streaming service, you really, once you work at one of these places and you start to understand international rights, and every country's got their own rules, and every country has, it doesn't just
And
work
things
that
don't
like,
always stay with
yeah,
that one, studio or production company, because sometimes the rights will, the studio, that company will shut down and the rights will lapse to somebody else. We were
yeah.
talking about that with a lot of the Miramax catalog now going to places like Lionsgate or Paramount or other places. And
I
so
don't even know who
the
owns
owner,
it now. I think Paramount does own part of Miramax, but someone else does now too. But
yeah.
yeah, it's just international rights and stuff like that is really, really tricky. Like, even look at, we never talked about the Marvel lawsuits that are going on right now, and like just
Yeah,
some of the
reverting
things
back
that
to like the Jack Kirby and Stan
yeah,
Lee estates and other
right, and which we've
creators of the
seen in like
comics.
Friday the 13th and some of those other horror franchises too, going back to what we were talking about with Scream, of like the original creators of that. The lawsuits are, were they independent contractors or were they employees of this of the studio, essentially, right? Because if they were independent contractors, they should own the rights to their creation. But if they were employees of a studio, then it's the studio owns it because you worked for them, right? So it's like this confusing thing where Stan Lee and Jack Kirby and all these guys, it's like it depends on, these things could revert back to them, and
Their
that
estate. I mean, they're
their
both dead
estate,
now.
yes,
Yeah.
that's what I mean.
Yeah.
Their estate. But then even if you look into those lawsuits, it's like only in the US though. Internationally is different. So it's like, even if Disney and Marvel lost those rights, it's like they would only lose the US rights. And I'm like, that just even more complicates everything. Where I'm like, and then you're starting to see that, in not even starting, it's been a thing forever of just like the rights in different countries is always, when things sell at a script stage, someone in Canada might buy it because they see potential in the Canadian market, but then it sells to someone else in the US. And then we've seen stuff come out on Netflix in the US, but it's Elevation here or whatever. It's really, really fascinating. So like a release strategy like this, I agree with you, doesn't completely work because you're kind of defeating the purpose, where if you have a VPN, you can just set your
And
country
somebody's gonna
to,
bootleg it out of spite.
oh,
Like
of
literally
course,
someone's
but
just gonna. And that's the other thing. Like, even though, like Neon releases or sends out screeners at the end of the year for,
I'm sure we'll get one
members.
actually.
Yeah. So like, again, it doesn't feel like it really makes any logistical sense
I
other than
think
it's
it's
just
a cool
being
idea, but
experimental, but it just feels like you're only doing it just to kind of keep on brand. And as much
to
as I
me it
do
is a
like a pitch
brand
a
building
pong,
thing, and it's also, this movie wasn't going to make us any money anyway, so let's do something unique to get people talking about it. And
right?
like,
But then it hurts
um
the movie as well, because I feel like people will be resentful towards it without even having seen the film, or like, again, I think it's a really good movie, but like having heard that and knowing that the film will be available on other streaming platforms and it'll never get a quote unquote, which I think is also bullshit. I think at some point it will get a Blu-ray release through
Criterion,
Criterion or
yeah,
something like that. It kind of makes you dislike the film, if
sure.
you're against what it's doing, and that's unfair, I think, to the movie, and I think it hurts. The marketing of that really does actually kind of hurt the film.
Hmm. Yeah. I don't disagree. Other news, we touched on the That 90s Show. So Netflix is doing a That 70s Show spinoff called That 90s Show, and they're bringing back Red and Kitty. So which is, it's Lori and God, what's Topher Grace's character's
Eric.
name? Eric. Their daughter Leia, goes to visit her grandparents, and it takes place at their home.
Didn't Topher Grace leave that
He
70s
did.
show at
He
one
wasn't
point,
even in the
and one of
last
the
season.
Myers brothers?
Yep. And like Ashton Kutcher left too, right? So like the last couple seasons were very weird because like two of your biggest stars left, but you tried to continue it without them. So, and they did that 80s show spinoff
Which only
right
lasted like
after.
maybe half a season.
Yeah. So I'm more, again, it, it's the trend in Hollywood, the legacy sequel kind of thing. Bring back a couple characters from that original thing, and you're doing, it's the 90s is a period piece now, right? Like like there was that thing that started popping off, like became viral on Twitter, being like the time gap from when that 70s show came out in the 90s is the same as if today was the 90s, or like if you did a show about the 90s now and they're doing
Right.
it right. So it's just, that was
And
convoluted. I
also
didn't say
been
it
long
properly.
enough, I think, for maybe, I guess, some interest in doing a revival series of something like that, where there's maybe now enough nostalgia for people that grew up with it or enjoyed it. But then there's also things that were like, yeah, to your point, like, or what we were talking about, Topher Grace left the series, Ashton Kutcher left the series. Not that they're going to be characters on the show, although they could probably easily pop up, because I don't think either one of those guys are really doing all that much.
No, well, you got The Ranch on Netflix, which
Right, but then the other thing is like the problematic stuff with
with
like
Danny
Danny
Masterson,
Masterson,
yeah,
even though it's not, the character Hyde isn't problematic. It's
problematic.
just the actor
Yeah.
who played him, wasn't he on The Ranch as well?
Yeah.
Yeah, so like, it's a weird thing to bring it back, but at the same time I understand that, like, you look at most shows now with the cycle of the reboot or the revival, and anything I think is pretty much fair game. And it's not necessarily surprising, but you look at it and you're kind of, oh, there's Georgie. um we both loved Twin Peaks The Return, but I can
Yeah.
see a lot of people complaining and saying like, well, what's the point of bringing back this early 90s fad that was popular in the moment, but then kind of basically kind of ran its course even before season 2 ended. It's just interesting now that we're in that cycle of, to your point, a lot of 90s shows getting rebooted, everything from Saved by the Bell to now this. And like, I wonder like what's left in terms of what other like sort of major 90s series that they could reboot at this point,
Yeah,
because
I don't
soon we'll
know.
be getting to the early
We're
2000s.
getting
And
Beast Wars, a movie too. So
yeah, but soon we'll be getting to the 2000s, and then
that will really be painful. Like the
yeah, well,
90s, we were young enough.
the lost thing will start coming back into, because I know you've talked about it, a
They'll
lost
do
sort
that
of
soon. Yeah.
revival. Yeah.
And it will be a legacy sequel. Like I don't know who you bring back for that. You probably bring back Hugo and I forget who they had. Hugo and was it Walt? Were they like, or Michael Emerson, maybe Ben too? I think Georgie's
Yeah, didn't
rubbing
they?
now on the microphone, so if you hear a weird noise or purring, that's her. Um, yeah, I could see Lost coming back. I don't know what other 90s stuff, but when we start getting the 2000s, even Lady Bird being a period piece a little bit was jarring. And I'm intrigued by that 90s show because I really loved that 70s show. And growing up in the 90s, I think it could be fun seeing a show set in 95, 96. I think it said like, so I'm intrigued by it. And I like Kitty and Red. And I think if you're going to bring back characters, it makes sense to have them just come back as the grandparents. And I think it could be fun. I don't know, or it could be terrible. But Georgie, what are you doing? Like,
I mean, I'm not against it in just the sense it's like, well, every other show that kind of was of the 90s or late 80s has had some sort of reboot or consideration to kind of bring certain things back. I mean, if you can bring back Roseanne and
right.
the X-Files, and it seems like everything other than maybe like Northern Exposures and like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, maybe like those are a couple things that haven't had a reboot as of yet. But there's some problematic stuff with Whedon, so I could see why that's probably
true.
haven't
Yeah.
done anything with that. But I'm just trying
Even
to think,
Nash
like,
Bridges is coming back.
I know. Well, the one thing that hasn't actually come back that I'm kind of surprised with is that Miami
Georgie,
Vice
what are you doing?
as a series, not as a
Yeah.
movie.
Yeah.
Like Don Johnson, man, bring him back as Crockett.
I wouldn't be surprised, but
God, Nash Bridges, the TV movie.
it is.
I know.
My only connection to Nash Bridges is it used to be on USA Network, right? And then it was always on either before or after WWE Raw. And I think Stone Cold Steve Austin was on an episode of Nash Bridges, and I just remember them like promoting the shit out of that. And oh god, Georgie's hitting buttons. So that was my only, like, I never watched Nash Bridges, but I used to always make fun of it because of that.
Yeah, I remember my grandmother watched it all the time, and I
It
just
seems like
remember the
a
opening
grandma
title.
kind of show.
Yeah, the title sequence being like, I think it was Terrence Trent D'Arby's "Sign Your Name," which was the song
Okay.
that plays at the beginning with again Don Johnson and Cheech Marin. So
Love it. Love it. Anything else that we missed over the last couple weeks? Or should we wrap this shit up? As Georgie is annoying me, but she's very cute. That 90s
sign your
show. Do you remember
name.
anything over the last couple weeks that you wanted to talk about?
I think we got the main stuff. To be honest, like, I think it's been fairly like low key in terms of movie news over the last little bit. Like, it's kind of felt like, you know, there has been this kind of ebb and flow in the industry right now, where it's like, okay, you have these productions that are about to go, start, but they're taking a little bit longer because of certain precautions that need to be in effect due to the pandemic still, and thinking about how to shoot and stuff like that. And like, there's been little sort of rumblings of like either casting or announcements of titles. Like Bill Murray announced that the title for the next Wes Anderson movie is Asteroid City.
Right.
And then Tilda Swinton confirmed that she is going to be in David Fincher's The Killer alongside Michael Fassbender, so things like that.
Love
But
that. Yeah.
nothing like on the scale. I'm sure as soon as we're done this, something will come out, which,
I have no doubt, but
yeah.
that's usually the case. But
I mean, Wonka's shooting now, and
God,
Timothy
that
Chalamet
Wonka
looks like Gonzo from A Muppet's
Gonzo
Christmas
from
Carol, or
which
Daniel
is the best.
Day-Lewis of Gangs of New York. So
That's the best. Yeah, the Gonzo from Muppet Christmas Carol was the best tweet I saw about that. But do we really need a Wonka prequel movie? Like the
no,
only
but
thing
again,
that like
that goes
Paul
back to the
King
Many
being
Saints of
involved.
Newark, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like there are just some things you don't need to know how the character became the character. You just enjoy the character in the context of the story that was originally presented. I don't need, I mean, and also, I mean, we've already seen a version
Yeah.
of it with Tim Burton's movie. And to your
Yeah.
point, Paul King has directed two really lovely movies with the Paddington films, but
That's what
um
gives me a little bit of hope that this will be, okay.
yeah, but at
Um
the same time, again, it's like the Many Saints of Newark, where it's just like, yeah, you tell a fan of The Sopranos, oh, would you like to see like a Tony Soprano origin story of when he grew up?
Most
Fans are
people
going to
would
be
say
like,
yeah.
yeah. And then it's like with Star Wars as well, right? Where it's like, oh, do you want to see these Star Wars prequels of Anakin becoming Darth Vader? Who's going to say no? And then when you see the results, you're kind of like, oh man, why did I want this? I
It's
didn't.
rarely a good idea.
No,
So
no.
that's
The only
what's
time I would say it really worked, and tonally it was different, but also a lot of people hated it because it wasn't what it was supposed to be, was Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me, where
Mhm.
like that prequel was its own thing, even though it was still part of the world Lynch created, but it was a horror movie, and it was also very depressing, and nobody really wanted just depressing. So, over time it's become a very much highly regarded and revered film. But when it was released, people were like, this isn't Twin Peaks.
That's where it
Ugh.
is. I'm trying to
Yeah.
point at it, but it's like right there, I think. Yeah, I agree. Well, thank you all for listening or watching. We really do appreciate it. Happy belated birthday to Eric. We covered that, which seems like a lifetime ago.
I
Another
know.
classic 2 hour and 40-minute podcast.
Well, it's
That
life,
will.
man. You have so much to do, and then like, you're busy right now, I'm busy right now, it's just, it happens,
We'll
and then
see
like
if we'll be back next week. I will let you
we'll have
guys
more
know.
reviews though.
I'm
So
going to be starting to pack everything up. But yeah, we will have more reviews. Might have to have some weird, maybe I'll have to have just a photo of me or something. We might have to do audio only or something like that, but we'll see. Because I'm going to start packing everything up at the tail end of this week. So, but we will have a Halloween Kills review. We do have a review out for Bergman Island, as well as The Last Duel that you guys can check out on the reviews channel or right here on YouTube. And yeah, we'll be back with I'll be on Star Wars screencast tomorrow over on Kinda Funny, covering the last 3 episodes of Star Wars Visions. So you guys can check that out over on the Kind of Funny YouTube channel and on podcast services everywhere on Kind of Funny Screencast. But yeah, moving is stressful but exciting. I'll be back in the city soon. You'll have a new background. I don't know what the hell that background's going to look like. Still trying to figure out what my computer/den area will look like. It will be a bit of a process, but we'll learn together, everyone. Eric, any other plans for the rest of the week?
Just reviews for The Last Duel and Halloween Kills and Mass for Rogers. And also I should mention I was recently on Robert Bellissimo's At the Movies, which is his YouTube channel, talking about Charles Lawton's The Night of the Hunter with Robert Mitchum. That was a lot of fun talking about that movie, and especially being the month of the Beast. It's a great genre film and a scary performance from Robert Mitchum. So if you've never seen that movie, I highly recommend it. It's available through Criterion. I will also be popping up again on his show sometime at the end of October, I think on the 27th, for a discussion on Carol Reed's The Third Man.
Cool.
Yeah.
Nice. As always, my name is Matt Rohrbeck. You can find more of my work around the internet, but mostly at untitledmoviepodcast.com. And you can follow me on all of those social medias at Matt Rohrbeck.
And I'm Eric Marchin. You can find more of my video reviews at rogerstv.com/cinemascene and on the social medias at EM6211.
Until next time.
I said, hey, what's going on?